Hello, it's 3 minutes after 10 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Keir Starmer is currently delivering a speech. I've had two thoughts so far this morning. Oh, there's a lovely poem I meant to share with you ages ago. I'll probably get it slightly wrong. Wendy Cope, do you remember? I love Wendy Cope. It's something like, some men never think of it. You did, you'd come along and say you'd almost bought me flowers, but something had gone wrong. The shop was closed, you'd had some thoughts, the sort that minds like ours dream up endlessly, you thought, I might not want your flowers. I used to smile and hug you then, now I can only smile. But look, the flowers you almost bought have lasted all this while. Isn't that, it just gets me, that poem. And I only thought of it because I've had some thoughts, the sort that minds like ours think up endlessly. And the first thought I had was, let's wait until Keir Starmer's speech is finished, because there are two headlines around today focusing upon what he is expected to say. The Daily Telegraph goes very big, and that is significant for reasons we'll get onto a little later in the programme. Very big on the line of he's going to wean the UK off immigration, off its reliance on immigration, because we're going to start training our own people more. But I always thought that an awful lot of the anti-immigration argument was based upon the idea that it was unskilled and people were coming here to do the jobs that Brits didn't want to do. So we may get stuck into that later. But there's another headline that essentially punts a very different perspective on the same speech. So it occurred to me that you shouldn't talk about speeches until they've finished. I'm sure I've fallen foul of this rule myself in the past, but rather than relying upon a very skewed editorial line, and I don't know which one is going to be the most skewed, the one saying UK must wean itself off migrant labour, or the one offering up rather more nuanced analysis of what he's likely to say, you shouldn't rely on the lens, the distorting lens of a newspaper report to discuss something that hasn't actually happened yet. So I glance to my right and I see him on a screen. His bouffant is a little smaller than it used to be, isn't it? His quiff is diminished. I think very wisely. When I first came across Keir Starmer, I used to worry that you couldn't trust a man who spent so long doing his hair in the morning. And now this is obviously foolish. Keith has a magnificent quiff. I don't know if you've ever witnessed Keith's quiff, but it is positively Starmer-esque in its cliff-like. As in the cliffs of Dover, not Cliff Richard, in its cliff-like luxuriance. And I'm wrong, it's just because I'm a scruff bag. That's probably it. I should spend more time in front of the mirror of a morning getting ready, and I wouldn't look like such a wurzel when I get to work, especially since they've put these blooming cameras in the studio. They're bane of my life, those cameras, they really are. And I look to the right and I see him with his diminished quiff, and I think, well, let's not talk about that speech until it's actually finished. So that's what we'll do. Okay, that was thought number one. We've probably in the past spent too much time analysing things before they've happened, because the newspapers have been given a heads up on what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And they, of course, will approach that from the perspective of their own prejudices and preconceptions. So anyway, thought number one. Thought number two, I struggle with this sometimes. Thought number two is really important. It's the distinction between politics and politician singular. Politicians and politician singular. So I am deeply dismayed, for reasons that Theo Usherwood will talk us through a little later in the programme, by the appalling editorial slant of the Daily Mail's front page this morning. You pay for MPs' Christmas parties. I was with Tracy Brabin yesterday, who, of course, succeeded Joe Cox in the Batley and Spen constituency after Joe was assassinated by a white supremacist terrorist. And Tracy told me, it's coming up on a future episode of Full Disclosure, she told me that she had a job persuading her family that she should take that role on, that she should run for that position. And she consoled herself with the thought that lightning wouldn't strike twice, that it was such a freakish occurrence in the context of British politics for a politician to be assassinated by a terrorist, that she could derive some comfort from that and offer encouragement to her loved ones who were very worried about her doing it. And then, of course, Sir David Amess suffered the same fate, and it, I mean, obviously just knocked her right back, and I mean, it knocked us all right back, but if you were the successor to Joe Cox in the Batley and Spen constituency, it would knock you back still further. And now, of course, she's not in Parliament anymore. She's the Mayor of West Yorkshire. It's a marvellous, marvellous interview with her that will be coming up shortly. Goodness knows when. We've got so many in the fridge. Now, on Full Disclosure, we've got so many to come. Brian Cox, the actor. Tracy Brabin. I mean, they're coming out of our ears. It's going to be great. I think we're clear till Christmas now, aren't we? We're home and dry. 8 minutes after 10. So the second thought I had, partly I think because of that conversation I had with Tracy yesterday, was the difference between criticising a politician for what they have done and criticism that is very dangerous and deliberately designed to malign all politicians. This is really important. Moving forward, as the management consultants say. Moving forward. This is really important because it's really dangerous to portray all politicians as being, quotes, as bad as each other. It's a really popular trope at the moment, isn't it? They're all as bad as each other. I used to love that fella who hung around outside the House of Commons going, all politicians are liars. All politicians... My fondness for him began to wobble when poor old Sheila Fogarty had to come back from an outside broadcast and come back to the studio because he was absolutely interfering with her ability to do her job. Oh, politicians are liars. I used to think it was quite funny. But it's not true. There are good politicians and there are absolutely appalling politicians. And so I was about to attack the Daily Mail for this very irresponsible and deeply misleading front page that I think exposes MPs to unhinged hatred, potentially. It's the worst kind of journalism that tries to portray all elected politicians as being part of some gravy train Mickey take. And then I thought, but you're always slagging off politicians. You're just as... And I thought, no, I'm not as bad, thank goodness. I am insulated from any accusation of hypocrisy because my criticism of politicians is always specific. It is an individual has done a thing. I cannot believe what Jacob Rees-Mogg said. I cannot believe what Nadine Dorries has done. I cannot believe that the architects of Brexit remain unpunished for the epic lies that they have visited upon this country. It's hugely different from saying, I wouldn't even catch me saying that all Brexit supporters are ... because it's not possible to say that. They voted for 17.5 million different things. It's becoming increasingly clear. So the difference between criticism of individual politicians for specific behaviour is a crucial part of our democracy. But cutting and dicing stories to turn them into things that people could use to hate all politicians, that's horrible. That's horrible, and that's deeply, deeply, deeply dangerous. And that's the Daily Mail in a nutshell this morning. So we'll get onto that a little later in the programme. And I mention that because we're about to talk about Rishi Sunak very specifically. And there are two elements of this issue that demand description and definition. One is, fairly obviously, that he is Prime Minister. And the second is that he is very wealthy. Now, I have no problem with either of those things. When you begin to wonder whether there is a conflict of interest between being Prime Minister and being very wealthy, you have to look at behaviours and issues. You can't say someone very, very wealthy's got no business being Prime Minister. That is silly. It's also sadly necessary, given the ludicrous bias and slant of organisations like the Mail and elsewhere. It's also very important to say, as Peter Mandelson tried to, and he got a kick in the teeth for this as well, that there is no beef with wealth. The idea that liberal politics or the politics of equality and decency are driven by the politics of envy is ridiculous. One of the great victories of evil rhetoric over the last 30 or 40 years is the combination of politics of envy plus champagne socialism. Because who's allowed to criticise the status quo if you've got those two cards on the table? I am. I'm allowed to criticise the status quo. How are you doing? Are you well off? No. Politics of envy. Oh, hang on. Could I have a go? Can I criticise the status quo? Are you well off? Yeah, I'm doing all right. Champagne socialism. You see? How many people listening to this are now going, crikey, I've been completely manipulated by that ludicrous pincer movement of dishonest politics and journalism. No one is allowed to criticise the status quo. No one's allowed to say it'd be good if they were a tiny bit less rich and we didn't have food banks. Oh, politics of envy. No, I'm doing okay. Seriously, I donate. I'm well enough off to donate to food. Champagne socialist. This is, I think, out of all the things that we talk about, all the things I've shared with you over the years, I think this is probably the most important in the terms of the damage it's done to public discourse in this country and the political landscape, the body politic. No one's allowed to criticise. So you'll find an article by an ex-Labour MP in the Daily Mail today talking about a proposal in Scotland for people to pay for NHS acts. Why do some people hate the wealthy? Why does everybody... No, but I mean, some people hate the wealthy. It used to be a line, didn't there, from the class war contingent saying eat the rich. But no one's saying hate the wealthy. You could make the country a lot fairer and the richest people in it would still be the richest people in it. It's just that the gap between them and everybody else wouldn't be quite so big. What's that? Politics of envy or champagne socialism? It's decency, actually. It's common decency. It's humanitarianism. And that brings us to Rishi Sunak. Right? And this very specific issue. I don't care how rich he is. I think his wife should pay the same proportion of her income that we do. I think the Prime Minister's wife or husband or civil partner, being a non-dom, is obviously ridiculous. I think it's outrageous that she continues to draw money from a company still doing business in Vladimir Putin's Russia. These are enormous problems. Again, dishonest people will pretend that this is some sort of portrayal of a wife as being a chattel. Absolute nonsense. The seat of power in this country is sanctioning Russia, and the wife of the man in the seat of power is taking 12.5 million quid out of a company that is still doing business in Vladimir Putin's Russia 6 months after saying they'd be leaving. That's not even a debate or an opinion. That's just plainly wrong. And in a country that didn't have such a ludicrously biased media, it would not be tolerated. But that's not the story that we're talking about today. The story that we're talking about today is the fact that the Prime Minister's family is on the books of a private GP practice that offers on-the-day surgeries. Right. I don't know whether you've got a problem with private GP practices. I think there's a naivety in opposition to some wealth-based privilege. I think that if my daughters were ill and I could afford to do it, if I could spend money to save their lives, even if it broke the law, never mind my own moral code, I would do it. It seems to me ridiculous to expect people not to use whatever they have at their disposal, whether it's their innate intelligence, their charm, their fast car, their bank balance, or their contacts and connections to help either themselves or their loved ones. That's a fundamental part of human nature that perhaps communism ignores, although that's a conversation for a different day. The problem is this, is that he is the Prime Minister. And he is part of a clinic that charges £250 for a half-hour consultation that you can access more or less whenever you want. It also offers appointments in the evenings and at weekends, as well as consultations by email or phone costing up to £150. This is not a conversation about whether or not such services should exist, all right? We may have that conversation on another day, and we may agree or disagree about what our answer to that question is. But this is not that day. This is not a conversation about whether or not private GP surgeries exist, should exist, or should not exist. For the record, I do not avail myself of such a service, but I am quite open about the fact that if my family's health or welfare depended on it and writing a cheque or spending some money could improve their situation, I would not hesitate to do it, and nor would you. Should I be able to? Is not the conversation that we're having today. The conversation we're having today is, I think, a desperately serious one. And it is this: how the hell can this man assume responsibility for a health service when he has no personal exposure whatsoever to the trouble in which it currently finds itself? God forbid he should need to go to hospital, or his family should need to go to hospital, in which case the choices are limited. The option to go private for some very serious interventions is not as great as the option to avail yourself of a private GP. But when you look at the decline in patient satisfaction since 2010, when patient satisfaction with the National Health Service was the highest it had ever been, wave your magic wand, in come the Conservatives, and today, 12 years later, I think it's the lowest, with more problems on the horizon, with industrial action happening because the nurses have been taken for granted so horribly for so long, with successive Conservative Secretary of States for Health presiding over what looks like managed decline, possibly as a softening up process for further privatisation in the future. I find it ridiculous and not a little repellent that the Prime Minister, who bleats endlessly about being from an NHS family, does not have to rely upon an NHS GP for his and his family's healthcare. I think it's really, really important. And I've been trying too hard lately to see both sides of an argument. I've been trying too hard lately to avoid the idea that I'm constantly criticising the Conservatives. This isn't about Conservatives. This isn't about politics in general. It's about a very specific problem, and the problem is this: how can we trust this man to, quote, fix the NHS when he is not a victim of its problems? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. I'd like to be wrong. I know I say that a lot and it sometimes sounds a little glib or trite or possibly even dishonest, but it's tiring pointing out the constant hypocrisy and unfairness of our political system at the moment. I'd love there to be a morning where someone could successfully persuade me that this isn't egregious or problematic or outrageous at all. But how the hell can we all be expected to sit here going, oh, yes, Rishi, no, Rishi, 3 bags full, Rishi, you do the NHS, Rishi, great work, going to improve it all. So what is the problem? Well, I don't know. My family don't go anywhere near it. It's just outrageous. How tightly round your neck would your Tory scarf need to be knotted for you not to feel the fundamental absurdity and injustice of having a Prime Minister in charge of a health service that he spends £250 a pop to avoid the problems of? As I said, you might have a job this morning persuading me that I'm wrong, but I would welcome the experience. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. It's 10:19. Imagine a home visit. I mean, how many times in the last few years have you thought, God, I wish I could get the doctor to come and visit? Don't tell me if you can, if you're lucky enough to be signed up with a surgery that does it, or you have a doctor who goes above and beyond. A huge number of people in this country can't even dream of a home visit from a doctor. If you've got £400 to £500, you can get one, which I think is going to be very hard to criticise, the existence of this facility. But if you are Prime Minister, surely you have to have at least one foot in the world that the rest of us inhabit. And when it comes to the NHS, more than anything else, more even than education, when it comes to the NHS, surely it's got to be both feet. Maybe not. Let's find out. Hader is in St Albans. Hader, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I wasn't expecting to call in. I do listen to your show most mornings, but usually my children are in the car if I'm doing a nursery run, so I'm always eger to call in, but I can't. But today,
fantastic. I've pushed your button. I've pushed your button successfully.
You definitely did, and I had to pull over and
good.
I made a mental note of the number because what you said really resonated with me, and I thought it's really important for us to call in.
Yeah, go on.
Share our own experiences. So for me personally, it sounds like I'm perhaps similar to you, and I'm fortunate enough to use. I can use private healthcare. I have used it many times. For many years now, and that's usually because
I haven't, for the record, but I have,
fine,
but not.
I would say I've
not at GP level. I mean,
I haven't used it at GP level, if I'm honest. So it's more surgical consultations or specialists. I'm not at the GP
done that
level
either. But I don't want to be holier than thou. If you showed me a financial pathway which I was able to afford that would improve the health outcomes for my loved ones, I would take it in most circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. So on the GP level, we still use the GP. My children, my wife, we use it. My wife's actually in healthcare as well, so I do get some sort of insight. I think for me the biggest issue is, I completely agree. How can someone empathise with what the struggles people go through? And again, if I look at myself, I always think, well, if I needed to, if I was in a worst case scenario, I could pay for it. But how do people? I mean, I'm from a working class background. I grew up in a very deprived area, and I'm still very much in touch with that. My family's still there, and I met my old GP. Well, he's older now, but that I had when I was a teenager, and I got to talking to him recently, and he was telling me of all the issues they had, and I said, "Oh, why do we have to wait 2 weeks to get a GP appointment? It's crazy. Like for my son, I have to wait 2 weeks." And usually what happens is we end up calling 111. We end up in A&E, which is again a drain on the NHS. And he didn't really know the answer. He said, we can't find GPs. We don't understand how we're going to fix this because we're constantly fighting a backlog. And I just think someone in a position like the Prime Minister, if he doesn't have to go through that and face those challenges, whether it's himself or family members or friends, then I don't see how he can understand how he's going to fix the problems. He just can't empathise with people.
I don't even know if it's empathy. I think it's actually. Really? I think you make powerful points, but I can see the counter to them as well. You can empathise with people whose experience is a million miles away from yours. I'm currently empathising with gay Qataris, for example, and I don't have much in common with them except my basic humanity. But I think experience is even more key here. I think you need to feel what it's like to have your poorly child unable to get an appointment, to be unable to. I think you actually need to feel it. Otherwise, the urgency of the mission to improve the NHS simply can't be felt.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think we've experienced it ourselves where we've had to, my daughter was actually really poorly. We called the GP and, I think it's a common story throughout the whole country now. It's a 2-week wait to maybe 3 weeks. You can potentially get a telephone consultation on the day if it's urgent, if they deem it urgent. And what happens is we call 111 and you end up seeing someone. But if you don't have that urgency, that sense of stress, how do you, I completely, the reason that it really struck a chord was you're right, the GP issue. I don't feel I would pay to see a GP. I kind of feel like, it would be wrong just because it seems like a service. Like I wouldn't pay to have a police officer come to my house. I would feel it was wrong.
That's on the cards as well, isn't it? Under private security costs. But if your child, I don't know why we always talk about children because it's exclusionary to people who aren't parents, but it helps, I think, to paint a picture. If your child was in epic pain and you couldn't get an appointment with an NHS GP, I mean, most parents would sell a kidney to get their child seen. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with... I think that's an inevitable consequence of capitalism, for good or for ill. But you can't be in charge of it if that's the path that you adopt. You have no experience of what it's like for everybody else in the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting that you agree from the perspective of having a foot in both camps and being... you've got to be clear-eyed about this. You can't outlaw healthcare. You can't have backstreet GPs for the benefit of people who've got a few quid. You're not going to be able to get rid of it. What you need is an NHS that makes it unnecessary. I always think about prawn sandwiches. My dad had healthcare when he was a Daily Telegraph journalist. It didn't extend to us, or if it did, we were never poorly enough to need it. But it meant that when he went into hospital for an operation, he had Sky TV and a little menu for food, and we didn't even have that at home. I used to go and visit him so I could watch football. He had Sky and that was that. But the treatment he got. Private health changed, didn't it, over that period of time in the 80s? And it was you were paying for the luxury, you were paying for the private room and the prawn sandwiches and the Sky TV. That's fine. But if you're paying to avoid the problems that the NHS has, I just don't think that's fine at all. If you're Prime Minister, if you're the CEO of Goldman Sachs, look, flipping heck. I'm not King Canute. No one's going to turn back that tide. If you're a gob on a stick on the radio who's got a few quid, that's fine. If you're Haidar in St Albans, no one can stop it from happening. But if you're in charge of it, then, well, we'll see. Hang on. We'll go take more calls after the very latest headlines with Dominic Ellis. 10:34 is the time. Martin writes, I am an NHS GP in Scotland. If your child is sick, we will see you and your child that day. We offer on-the-day appointments and home visits for people who are unwell or not safe to get to the surgery. No hostages, writes James. It's as simple as this. Don't tell us that it's good enough for you. Don't tell us that it's good enough for us if you don't think that it's good enough for you. And this, again, is why it is different for a Prime Minister than it is for someone in almost any other job. We're talking about Rishi Sunak being able to drop 250 quid to a private GP practice in order to avoid the trials and tribulations that everybody reliant upon the NHS faces on a daily basis, except it would seem in Scotland. Rachel's in Camborne in Cornwall. Rachel, what would you like to say?
Oh, James, you've put me in a terrible position.
Oh, no.
You've put me in a terrible position. And you've ruined the morning.
Did you stretch first? Did you stretch first? I hate the idea of you being in a terrible position.
Oh, dear. I was having such a nice morning before you started.
Clip that up for an advert, will you? We'll use that.
Right.
Go on, then. I'm ready.
Let me just set the scene here. I'm a Labour supporter. I've always voted Labour. I come from a family in Sheffield, steelworkers, that's my background. I've worked for 31 years for the NHS. And when I heard you say about, is this chap fit to do this job if he doesn't use the service, what came back to me was, when I worked in the NHS, I finished my career as a midwife, and I don't have children. And the inevitable question I would get from people that I was caring for sometimes was, do you have children? And the look on their face would change when I said no.
Oh.
As if I wouldn't be competent enough, or in some way there was something
you'd lack something. A bit like when Andrea Leadsom said, as a mother, I'll make a better Prime Minister than Theresa May.
So, yeah, that kind of thing. So I don't want to defend this man. I don't want to defend a Conservative, but you don't necessarily to have all the vast experience of a certain
I agree with you.
thing
I've got this.
to
Don't
be able
worry.
to be competent in doing the job. But it's like saying if you're a brain surgeon, you need to have had a lobectomy before treating somebody else.
It's not. I've got this. I'm supremely comfortable that I can get you out of the uncomfortable position in which you found yourself.
Listen, I'm pacing up and down here.
I'm going to be a chiropractor to your opinions today. That is my role, because you were a brilliant midwife. And Rishi Sunak would be insulated from the fear that his lack of experience of the system means he won't feel the urgency for if he was using a private GP service while working as a GP. Then I'd be cool. That would be fine. I mean, look, he's using his money to avoid the service that he works morning, noon and night to provide, because he knows how hard it is. He knows that they're on a hiding to nothing, and he's elected to use his income to make sure that him and his family don't have to go through the system that he works for. But he works for it, so he has knowledge of it. He feels it. He looks at his patients and he wishes they could all afford to do what he can do. But he's not in that category, is he? He's not a midwife with no children. He's a prime minister with no personal experience of the GP system in this country. They're two completely different things.
Yeah, but that's why he's got a health minister, or there are other people around him informing him.
Which is fine, but nothing would inform him as powerfully as his personal experience of sitting there on hold for 90 minutes trying to get, and not being able to getting through and being told that you can't have an appointment for 3. He needs to feel it. Only the Prime Minister and possibly the rest of the Cabinet, the Secretary of State for Health. Nobody else. No, I don't care about plutocrats and oligarchs or just hard-working middle-class people who've elected to spend money on healthcare instead of a holiday. He can't be Prime Minister without knowing what it's like to be a citizen of the country that he governs. And this is one of the most key areas of citizen experience.
Right. Okay, so what do you want him to do, James?
I want him to actually sign up to his local GP surgery and live with it, warts and all, until he's not Prime Minister anymore, at which point he can appoint a private surgeon to work alongside the maid who goes out every day and buys different types of bread for every member of his family.
I can't believe I'm having this conversation. It's terrible, isn't it? It's terrible.
No, it's not terrible at all. It's just different, and you've done what I often do: is you're knitting together the personal and the political. And when I criticised him, you remembered, you heard the echoes of people who seem to be implicitly criticising you. I would never criticise you. So it's even worse, I imagine, for male midwives, isn't it? Oh, blimey, he's a man and he's a midwife. It's a ridiculous criticism. How dare they suggest that you not being a mum has any impact whatsoever upon your ability to be a midwife?
But surely I hear what you've said, but surely the principle still applies to him, doesn't it? To Sunak, it still applies to him.
But no one's going to accuse you of having no knowledge of midwifery. I'm accusing him of having no knowledge of NHS GPs.
Yeah, I wish I'd not wronged James.
No, don't be ridiculous, so Rachel. You were in an uncomfortable position, and now you're not anymore.
I just had a very emotional response to what you were saying.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I'm going back to bottling my honey.
Thank you.
So much calmer and kinder.
Do you keep bees?
Yeah.
Oh.
Keep up the good work, James.
Thank you very much. If a jar of
might be my last call.
No, please don't say that. It was a really powerful point and brilliantly made, brilliantly articulated.
No, it was from emotion, really.
Yes, but
this is what I do. It comes from emotion, and it should come from more an intellectual place.
No nonsense. We all do that. Mine comes from emotion as well. If a jar of your Cornish honey were to make its way to Leicester Square, that would definitely be a very welcome episode. Not that I'm begging or anything like that.
Well, Christmas is coming. You never know.
Certainly is. Rachel, look after yourself. Thank you so much, and thank you for being such a star as well. That is what it is. I feel her pain. How dare you? I mean, it suggests that someone's going to be less good at doing their job because of circumstances from their own life that are unavoidable. But there's nothing unavoidable about paying 250 quid every time you need to see a GP, or 500 if it's the weekend. And the Prime Minister should know what it's like to be you. 0345 6060973, because he's the Prime Minister. Steve's in Blackpool. Steve, what do you reckon?
I think it's a bit of a moot point, because he's not going to experience it like we do. When I was in the army, I was in Afghanistan, David Cameron came to visit us.
Gosh.
He didn't queue up in the cookhouse like everyone else to get his food and breakfast. and things like that in the morning,
Yeah.
the food was taken to him because he's the Prime Minister. And he had a team around him of PAs that dealt with everything for him. So they made sure the breakfast got to him. They made sure he had food when he was doing his meetings and things like that. Rishi Sunak is going to be the same. If he rings up a GP surgery and says, look, I need to make an appointment, because he's the Prime Minister, he will get preferential treatment. And
that's a good point.
I can't see how that wouldn't happen. A GP surgery is not going to say, oh, we've got the Prime Minister coming in 2 weeks. Let's just let him sit there. That won't happen. He'll ring up a GP surgery. The GP surgery will say, oh, yes, Prime Minister, not a problem. We'll see if we can get you in this afternoon.
We need a GP to confirm or deny this, don't we? But it seems a pretty powerful suggestion to me. His experience is not going to be the same as yours. Seems a reasonable suggestion. But I tell you what, Steve, I'd be very interested to know what Gordon Brown did. I would not be gobsmacked if it turned out that Gordon Brown's relationship with his local GP surgery was pretty much the same as yours and mine.
Quite possibly, but I imagine that because it's number 10 Downing Street and 11 Downing Street, it comes under the control of a specific GP surgery because of the geographical location.
Yeah, but
with it being in the centre of Westminster, I can't see that GP surgery being one that struggles for anything.
But then he's had no experience ever, which undermines my point slightly about this only matters because he's Prime Minister. How can you listen to a word he says about the NHS if he has no knowledge, apart from when he's banging on about how NHS his family is, despite the fact that he doesn't even use an NHS GP anymore?
Well,
how can he care? How can he care as much as you do, or I do, or a GP does, an overworked GP? How can he care as much as someone who has struggled to get an appointment? How can he feel the need for change as keenly as somebody who either is such an amazing constituency MP with 20 years on the clock that they've been told so many stories by constituents that it doesn't matter that they've got no personal experience of it himself, which is fine, but not him, or he's lived it, or his mum's lived it, or his dad's lived it. Maybe his parents have lived it. You need to know, don't you?
Yeah,
I think you do. Maybe I'm being naive.
The only way you're going to get that empathy is by going through the NHS process before you become Prime Minister. Because as soon as you become Prime Minister, he's not going to get the same treatment as everyone else.
No, but his
kids would. He's going to get a skewed opinion. His kids might do.
So we need to know whether they're signed up with a GP surgery, do we? I'm uncomfortable asking politicians details about what their children are doing, but he's in charge of the access that my children have to the NHS, so I think I'm allowed to know what his deal is, aren't I? Are we? What do you think?
Yeah, we are. But to be honest, if I could afford to pay for a private GP, I would do.
I agree. That's not the conversation we're having. We're having a conversation about whether the man who is in charge of the only GP you can see should be able to swerve it completely and pay 500 quid to see his own at the weekends.
Yeah, but we've also got another issue is how does a millionaire have empathy for people who are not millionaires? Even before he came from a GP, an NHS family with his parents having a pharmacy. Yeah. But he's a very successful businessman, or his wife's a very successful businessman.
A money trader, and she's the daughter of a very successful businessman. Let's just say they're very rich.
Yeah, so they're very rich. So
his dad was a GP, his dad was a GP, not a pharmacist.
Was he?
Yeah.
Well, that should give him an insight into it anyhow.
Yeah, and it's given him such an insight, he's decided he's not going to be part of the system, even though he wants to be the man in charge of it. Boom.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you that the NHS is massively underfunded, but I just don't think that this is a hill for people to die on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I do. I disagree. I feel a lot more strongly about this than I expected to. I've got to be honest with you. And part of the problem is the media conditioning that I talk about every morning. It's an exclusive in one newspaper. It's in The Guardian, which I sometimes approach thinking, oh, here we go. And yet that's me being groomed. That's me being manipulated. It's a huge story. If it was if it was a Labour Prime Minister, it would be on all the front pages. Because Labour are supposed to practice what they preach or whatever it is. But on this particular issue, he's supposed to practice what he preaches as well. Especially if he marches around the place describing himself as being from an NHS family and not mentioning, but I've got a private GP now, lads, obviously. I'm not stupid.
It depends whether he wants to skew the argument of saying, yes, I understand that GP practices are under pressure and I want to remove myself from that burden. So
I like that argument. I like that argument. I've used that myself over the years with private education. I don't think it really washes, but it salves the conscience of people who pay for privilege while knowing deep down that the privilege probably shouldn't exist. But I don't buy it with the Prime Minister. That's the whole point about this conversation, is that the Prime Minister is in charge, and therefore he has to live by slightly different rules, or very different rules from the rest of us. And by that I mean he has to be better than the rest of us. He has to be more careful than the rest of us. Not Boris Johnson, whose view of the rules that prime ministers should follow was basically none of them. He should be above and beyond the kind of conduct that we would expect from others. He should go further. And on this particular issue more than anything, he should live the same life that the rest of us live. I just think that should be obvious. I appreciate it isn't, and it may well be that I'm wrong. 10:46 is the time. Thank you, Steve. Did you talk to David Cameron when he came to Afghanistan?
Yeah, very briefly. Said good morning to him, shook his hand, and everything. So it was quite nice, actually, because the only thing he was interested in was a bacon sandwich.
Yeah, it was before Ed Miliband's embarrassment, I suppose. No politician's been near a bacon sandwich since. I like that. Thank you. And it is a good point. You can't expect the Prime Minister to have experience of being a soldier, but you can have experience of being a citizen. And the key experience in terms of the relationship between government and citizens is probably the health service. And he doesn't have the same experience that the people he seeks to govern. It's a weird ambition to want to be in charge of a country in which you are not exposed to any of the problems that the ordinary citizen suffers. A really weird ambition and potentially a quite dangerous one. Cheers, Steve. 10:47 is the time. 10:52 is the time. I maybe it's the Catholicism in me, but I think power should involve sacrifice. I don't think power should involve untrammeled privilege and preference in the way that someone like Boris Johnson believes. Why do you want to be Prime Minister? Well, so that I can get away with doing even more crazy things than I got away with as a journalist, of course. I think that if you are seeking to be Prime Minister and you are very wealthy, then you should eschew your ability to insulate yourself from many of the problems faced by the people you govern simply through having the cash. This is why the conversation today is not about private health or private education or public transport or social housing. It's very much about prime ministers and the relationship they have with the people that they govern. And it seems to me still, although perhaps not as strongly as it did at 10 o'clock this morning because of the quality of the calls, it seems to me still that the prime minister should do everything he can to experience the average British person's relationship with the GP system in this country. And he's not. He's done the opposite. He drops 500 quid at weekends or 250 quid on weekdays to see someone as and when he wants. And we have to presume, in the absence of confirmation or denial, that extends to his whole family as well, because it would be weird if it didn't. And most of us would probably sign our kids up before we signed ourselves up, wouldn't we, if we were taking advantage of this sort of system. So that, I stress again, this is about the relationship between a prime minister of a country and the people of a country, and crucially, the relationship for both of them, the Prime Minister and the people, with key infrastructure. And nothing is more key than the NHS, I contend. Joy's in Raynham. Joy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
good morning. This is my first time ringing into your show, so I'm happy to talk to you. I've listened to you for many years now.
Welcome.
What I have to say is I think you're wrong by saying that the Prime Minister has to literally sign up or get off his private GP and go back to the NHS. You tend to disregard the fact that he, grew up with parents who worked in the NHS.
I think that makes it worse.
I don't think so, because does it mean that he has to perpetually remain there? And do you think that it means he's forgotten totally his memory's been
well, first of all, I began by saying that patient satisfaction in the NHS in 2010 was the highest it's ever been. So he was a long way from helping his mum with prescriptions on a Saturday morning in 2010, wasn't he? He was filling his boots at Goldman Sachs. So I don't think the experiences he had as a child, as a son of a GP in the 1980s and 1990s has got much bearing on what the NHS is like in 2022.
Right. So if you disregard that bit, then where do we? And I know health is very important,
yes.
but so is housing. So is
Good
food.
question.
So where does he have to go and live in? Maybe some crappy council building with mold.
Watch your language ever so slightly. So if you take my argument to its logical conclusion, he'd be living in a council flat full of mold and travelling everywhere on public transport.
And living on the minimum wage because, getting food stamps because that's the only way he can understand what everyone else is feeling.
This is a powerful point, and I'm not going to steamroller you or claim that there's a zinging response to it. But what you describe, the circumstances you describe, are not commonplace. They might be majority. I don't think they are, for what it's worth. They're not. But the basic experience of the massive majority of this country with GP services, I'm not talking about transport. I'm not talking about...
James, you may be insulated from it, but it is quite commonplace, especially the housing bit, especially the cost of living. People are suffering. People are finding it difficult having to choose whether to heat or to eat. You may not notice it, but it's happening. But you don't
do that because he can't have experience of every problem that every Briton faces.
Exactly.
No, hang on, I haven't finished speaking. You can't say exactly when I'm halfway through my zinging point. Because you can't have experience of every single problem that every Briton faces. You don't arrive at the conclusion that he shouldn't have any experience of any. He should do his best to reasonably avail himself of the common experience of people in the country that he governs. And the NHS seems to me to be a fairly easy entry-level requirement, while recognising the absurdity of demanding that he lives in a mould-infested council flat and goes everywhere on an E2 bus.
But
it's the NHS.
When you say he should go on that the NHS is reasonably easy, you also say, I've heard you say earlier in this programme, that if you had one of your loved ones had a health problem, you would do anything.
Yes, I would.
To use
but I'm not Prime Minister.
But the Prime Minister's a human being as well.
But he wants to be in charge of all the other human beings in the country, which means he has to do everything he can to walk in their shoes.
It's about helping. So it's not about ruling, it's about serving.
No, but how do you know the desperation? How do you know the desperation of the people who can't get a GP appointment if you have no inkling of it yourself?
Well, that's the point. He doesn't not have an inkling of it just
I need
because
persuading
he
then.
doesn't.
How's he going to persuade me?
By making sure it's sorted.
Right.
It doesn't have to be.
So what? Should we start the clock on that now?
Okay. And I just wanted to say one more thing. You mentioned that you were Catholic. Now, I'm Catholic. I was raised a
Catholic.
Oh, okay.
It comes and goes. Faith is a many splendid thing.
I'm raised and still a Catholic. Now, in terms of that, you know that priests don't get married, but they do give marriage advice. And some might say, well, it's not the best.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fairly confident in saying I personally wouldn't advise you to go to a priest for marriage advice. And there's not a great deal in the Bible about why you should, actually. In fact, I don't think there's anything in the Bible at all about going to priests for marriage advice, because there was no such thing as priests.
True. There were no such things as priests in the Bible. So
I think I've dealt with that point better than I dealt with your previous ones.
But James, all I'm saying is it is not. It's not practical. It
is practical. That I will step back from this.
Anybody?
No, it is practical, because I'm almost certain that other previous prime ministers would not. They may have had a better experience or an easier experience or some sort of queue jumping experience. But the act of writing these cheques, setting up this direct debit, in the same way that they didn't rearrange his wife's non-dom status until they got caught. It's this really insidious sense that they're going to continue to avail themselves of epic privilege until someone actually points out that they shouldn't be doing that while they are in Downing Street. Before and after doesn't matter. The conversation
is completely different. I'm not even going to.
I think it's exactly the same.
On that one.
I think it's exactly
the same.
No,
because very few people have access to non-dom status.
But everybody pays tax, and the people in charge should pay the same proportion of their income in tax that the people they're in charge of should pay. And it's household income that we're looking at. Anyway, we've had that debate many times.
That's a completely different thing.
So you don't want a prime minister. You don't think it would be better for a prime minister to be signed up with an NHS GP than with a private one?
I would
prefer that the NHS is the place where everybody would want to sign up to, and that's what I want the Prime Minister to work on.
Okay, it's a bit of a politician's answer, but we can at least part in agreement, because I would like that as well. I just think the likelihood of that NHS being created is enhanced by the amount of reliance that politicians have upon the NHS that is in need of improvement. My apologies to Mike, Ian, Chris, Rashani, Susan, Mel, and others waiting to talk about that. I like this. Jay and Milton Keynes, I don't know if this quite qualifies for Idiot's Corner, but you're pretty close, mate. Literally 3 callers now. You are so trying to blow smoke up our backsides that you're still arguing and can't let it go just once. Just give up. Mate, the number of messages I get saying that too many people who agree with me ring in, and now people who are disagreeing with me are ringing in, and you think that somehow proves another problem? Oh, some days I don't know why I bother. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Some criticism of my suggestion that you shouldn't talk about speeches until they're finished, on the perfectly reasonable grounds that these days they actually release the full text of the speech before it's actually been delivered. To which, if I was desperately trying to defend myself, which I'm not, I'd say, yeah, but what about intonation? What about if halfway through the speech you did a really sarky voice? Or did like little finger quotes or something? Or something? Stop laughing, I'm trying to be serious. Or did little finger quotes like that to say that he didn't really mean it. Because the Keir Starmer speech that is now concluded to the Confederation of British Industry was widely shared with the newspapers and succeeded in securing a front page in the Daily Telegraph stating Starmer, UK must wean itself off migrant labour, which is going to be manna from heaven for your average Daily Telegraph reader, but not, I suggest, for many, but certainly not all or even average Labour voters. And if you don't understand what I mean by that, I've got 2 words for you: red wall. Theo Ashwood, our political editor, is here.
This speech is about facing 2 ways, James, towards the red wall, to say, I'm getting tough on immigration, and that's what Keir Starmer wants to put across, and as the Daily Telegraph reported, he means it.
Migration is part of our national story. Always has been, always will be. And the Labour Party will never diminish the contribution it makes to our economy, to public services, to your businesses and our communities. But let me tell you, the days when low pay and cheap labour are part of the British way on growth must end.
So you heard it there from Keir Starmer.
Can we listen to that again? Is that the juiciest bit?
That's the prime morsel when it comes to migration.
So I think they've possibly extrapolated quite a lot for that Daily Telegraph headline from those words.
Yes, but there was a caveat. There was a rider to it, and that's why I said the speech faced 2 ways. But do you want to play that part again?
I want everyone to pay attention. Who was that caller who rang in the other day? And I sent him away with his homework. I listened to the Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner podcast. Can we track him down? And I think you were off. So you need to liaise with whoever was standing in for you and get the. We want to. Or actually, no, he should be listening, shouldn't he? So if it was you, if you're the one that I sent away with homework, I'm going to start doing this with more callers and listeners, actually, issuing homework. I think it's quite important as part of our mission to enlighten the nation. I'd love to know how you got on with those 2 podcasts. But anyway, pay attention to this, all right? Don't just think, oh, he's playing a clip, I'll go and make a cup of tea. Pay it, or flipping out Theo's in the studio with his quotes, banter, end quotes. I'll wait till he's gone and then get back to the calls. Or James's magnificent monologues. Pay attention to this, all right, and listen to every syllable, please.
Migration is part of our national story. Always has been, always will be. And the Labour Party will never diminish the contribution it makes to our economy, to public services, to your businesses and our communities. But let me tell you, the days when low pay and cheap labour are part of the British way on growth must end.
Yeah, so low pay and cheap labour, there's no from abroad.
No, but
there is in the Daily Mail's coverage and there is in the Daily Telegraph's coverage.
But he talks about migration in the first part.
He did. So he knows what he's doing.
Yes.
Possibly being a bit too clever for his own good. Talk to me about the other way in which he faced.
So the other way is about trying to ensure that he comes across as reasonable, as addressing the point around economic growth, which of course has been sluggish, and now we are in recession. And the point is that he wants to come up with a deal with businesses whereby they can bring in labour from overseas to fill the shortages that they have. But in order to do so, there's going to be a rider, and that is they have to come up with funds, money, resource to pay for training in this country.
With my Labour government, any movement in our points-based migration system, whether via the skilled worker route or the shortage occupations list, will come alongside new conditions for business. We will expect you to bring forward a clear plan to boost skills and more training, for better pay and condition, for investment in new technology. Now, we can talk about how this is done. Dialogue is at the heart of partnership.
That was Keir Starmer. The context to this, James, is what happened over the weekend with that briefing about closer ties with the European Union.
This was from Downing Street,
This was
reportedly.
from Downing Street.
Yes.
Well, we think from number 11, given that there are reported tensions today between Rishi Sunak's team and Jeremy Hunt's team. And that's very instructive about the problems that they're facing, that they are somehow, in order to get economic growth, tacking towards the centre, tacking towards a closer relationship with the European Union. What Keir Starmer is trying to do is say, well, actually, I'm going to stay on the ground I was already on, fighting over with Boris Johnson. I'm going to stay in that place to keep those, or to try and retain those red wall seats at the next election. If Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt want to go off and fight over the Liberal Democrats with the Liberal Democrats over the home counties, that's absolutely fine. But politically, I'm going to stay tough on issues, particularly like immigration.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. It's not that tough to talk about essentially doing what, and this, I appreciate this ship has sailed. This is completely me being James O. Brexit, but allow me a moment of indulgence, is that you could do all of this while you were still a member of the European Union. You could have income thresholds. You could insist that people had a job lined up. They do it in Belgium. They do it to a lesser extent in Germany. But that debate's over. What he seems to be doing is addressing a fascinating constituency of people who said that they had no problem with immigration. They just didn't like uncontrolled immigration.
Yes.
Now, there are people in that constituency. I want to make that absolutely clear. But they are also clothes that racists put on in order to pretend that they actually were comfortable with foreigners coming to this country, but they couldn't actually say what they really thought, which was that there were too many brown faces on the tills in Tesco, and that's why they voted for Brexit, as one of my famous callers stated. So he's addressing that, and no one knows how big that constituency is. People who complain about living next door to Romanians, or people talking foreign on trains before going back to their German wife, they are not uncomfortable with uncontrolled immigration. They are racists who are uncomfortable with foreign people breathing the same air that they breathe, unless they're married to them. But that is who he's talking to. He's saying, well, of course we need immigration. Immigration is great, but it's going to be much more carefully managed than it has been in the past, which is a largely non-existent problem. But it's very, very big in the minds of voters.
It's very big, and he wants to make sure that he can. And it's about seizing an opportunity, James. This is about saying, actually, given what's going on with the Conservative leadership at the moment, here is an opportunity to actually stake a claim to make these, once again, traditional Labour voters, to bring them back to the party with a speech like this. The detail doesn't really matter a huge amount for Keir Starmer's point of view. This is an opportunity, and it's a perfect juxtaposition against the CBI, which is, of course...
Which is saying we need more immigration.
Exactly.
And the Prime Minister standing up and saying we need less, effectively. Or certainly Suella Braverman being committed to, under half of what we currently have, never mind talking about needing more.
A politician turning up at a conference and telling the delegates or the members or whoever's turned up to attend that they've got it wrong always plays well with the constituency part, or generally you want it to play well with the constituency part that is going up against that particular industry.
So, in a nutshell, he is addressing a rhetorical issue here. He is addressing the perception in the minds of many voters that there are too many people coming here to do jobs, even though we currently have vacancies at record historic levels, while also trying... in fact, he's riding two horses. He's just trying to...
You've also got what's happening in Manston at the same time, even though those who are travelling to the UK across the Channel on perilous journeys...
being sent straight back again. There's a great Albanian quoted in the newspapers today begging people not to come via the route he came by, which is helpful and important. But and Sunak spoke yesterday about it, the people in boats being the biggest priority for the country right now, which is ugly.
We had another one which was getting down inflation,
possibly inevitable. So Starmer's plan is to recognise the necessity of immigration while soothing the concerns of people who think there's too much.
Yes.
That's going to be tough. We're going to ask. That's why I'm surprised you used the word perfect.
Yeah, it's is what he's trying to say. We can, and from Keir Starmer's point of view, the most important aspect of this speech is about immigration.
Yeah.
But he is trying to, at the same time, to those Labour members and Labour voters who might be uncomfortable with that kind of rhetoric, say, actually, we do need to be concerned about this because it relates to economic growth.
Absolutely. And this is why I now apologise for apologising earlier when I suggested that my contention at 10 o'clock that we shouldn't talk about a speech until it's finished was actually correct, because you read here, so Keir Starmer will today warn firms to train British workers instead of relying on cheap labour from abroad in his latest U-turn on immigration. And although he used the word immigration and the word labour in the same paragraph, he didn't actually say that. He is opposed to cheap labour, whoever it is doing the labour. And he is committed to the idea of getting higher wages and better conditions for everybody, wherever they came from. But he thinks that if you have a queue for a job, it's not unreasonable to suggest that you don't need to go beyond these shores to find people to add to the queue if people here have been adequately trained to take up the job in the queue.
Basically.
Yeah, so we were right to wait until the speech was finished. Imagine if you'd been talking about this based on Daily Mail and Daily Telegraph headlines and front pages, you would have given your listeners or your readers a completely different idea of what the Labour leader has actually done this morning.
One other thing.
Theo has his hand up.
So, I think Keir Starmer and the leader's office will be very pleased with those headlines from the Daily Mail and Daily Telegraph.
I do too. Final question, and this I think is illustrative of what we've just discussed and defined. Who are these people that are currently not being trained? Because the big objection to immigration from, and again, I'm sure some people are real and do exist, but the ones who were massive racists pretending to have valid concerns, was that it was unskilled immigration coming in. That was the problem, all people who were unskilled coming in. So who are all the Brits, where are all the Brits who would be filling vacancies that currently exist if only there'd been more training?
Well, a number of the Brits are dropping out of the workforce. According to the Office for National Statistics, it went up to 2.5 million.
Not because they feel untrained, but because they feel unfulfilled.
Or unwell.
Yes.
Often unwell, and because of long-term sickness. And that's a problem that will need to be addressed fairly quickly, because it's going to cause huge pressures on the welfare system.
I mean, listen, two phone-ins, three phone-ins, what's it going to be? Is it simply going to be, what do you make of this speech? And I'll play you the two clips in a moment again, because I don't want you relying on Daily Mail and Daily Telegraph journalists to find out what Keir Starmer said this morning, because it's a million miles away from some of this coverage and some of this headline writing. But equally, I want to know, because you know what a pain in the behind I can be sometimes on detail, I want to know who he's talking about. Who is he talking about? Who are the British workers that need more training? And that's not me saying I'm sure they don't exist. It's me saying I'm a bit ignorant on this one. I'm going to need your help. Who are they? Where are they? Because I think that they were a legion of people invented or hugely inflated and exaggerated by the individuals who've done more to damage this country than anybody since the Luftwaffe. The people who pretended not to be racist by inventing valid concerns, so-called valid or legitimate concerns about immigration. Where is the army of British workers who are currently working, but would be doing other jobs if only they had more training? And if there is an army of British workers who are currently working, but would be doing other jobs if only they had more training, who's going to do the jobs that they vacated? You see the problem? Yeah, so does Keir Starmer. He's not trying to solve that problem. He's trying to solve the problem of newspapers like the ones that wrote the headlines that completely misrepresented what he actually said, but did so in a way that will probably win him more votes than it loses. Oh, you're still with me at the back? Actually, I'll open up the phone lines, even though it's going to need a little bit more illustration on this one, because you can certainly come in now and come in quick on the question of what did you think about that? What do you think about that? 0345 6060 973, and then I'll worry it like a dog with a ball and come up with a couple of more detailed and specific questions. But I'd love to hear from you right now, about what you made of that speech. Now you know what he actually said, rather than what right-wing newspapers wanted you to think he was going to say. What do you make of that? I was uncomfortable this morning when I saw the headlines. I'm less uncomfortable now because I think in pursuit of power, you have to sometimes address the priorities of the population, even if those priorities are built largely on nonsense. Does that sound reasonable? Let's find out after this. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. We will get to the calls, I promise. But first, two crucial clips from Keir Starmer's speech to the CBI today, which, whether you appreciate it or not, I'm playing to you so that you rely in your analysis of his speech on what he's actually said and how he has said it, rather than on the front pages of the Daily Telegraph or coverage in the Daily Mail, which has conflated two elements of the speech that he did not himself conflate. Here is clip one.
Migration is part of our national story. Always has been, always will be. And the Labour Party will never diminish the contribution it makes to our economy, to public services, to your businesses and our communities. But let me tell you, the days when low pay and cheap labour are part of the British way on growth must end.
I find that fascinating, and I'm not at my strongest on this because I don't quite understand the issue, but I do believe it exists. The jobs that were done by people who came here from Eastern Europe on relatively low wages could instead have been done by people already here who would have been paid higher wages. I don't get that, but I'm not suggesting it's not true. I'm just admitting that I don't fully understand it. What jobs are those people doing at the moment, for example? And if they're not well, anyway, you can see that. And here is clip two, which needs to be listened to and observed and understood very much in tandem with the last clip.
With my Labour government, any movement in our points-based migration system, whether via the skilled worker route or the shortage occupations list, will come alongside new conditions for business. We will expect you to bring forward a clear plan to boost skills and more training, for better pay and condition, for investment in new technology. Now, we can talk about how this is done. Dialogue is at the heart of partnership.
So I think it's a vote winner, potentially, among voters that abandoned the Labour Party in their droves at the last election. But I don't know if it's a substantive policy. I don't know what it actually addresses directly. And it may be a vote loser among people who read headlines like Starmer planned to wean UK off migrant labour and balk at that, which is a position I also understand. So I think it's good politics, but is it good policy? 0345 6060 973. And of course you can argue that it's bad politics and good policy, or good politics and good policy, or bad politics and bad policy, or or neither, or none, or all of the above. All right, come one, come all. Ed's in Sheffield. Ed, what do you reckon?
It's really frustrating to see this agenda being pushed by Labour. You know, being a lifelong Labour voter, running a business, employing people from all over the world.
Yes.
And it's not training that's the problem. You know, we get many applicants from the UK who are very well trained, you know, master's degrees, doctorates, and they can't write a CV without spelling mistakes. They come to interview, they expect a job. And the applicants that we get who are foreign students and looking to get jobs in the UK are generally brilliant when it comes to interview. They have an excellent attitude at work.
I mean, you know and I know that these are sweeping generalisations, but to be clear, they are drawn from your personal experience, your personal and frequent experience.
Yes, I mean, this year we've recruited 40 people. Next year we're expecting to recruit 60. And every interview round, it's pretty much the same.
Can I ask what sector you're in, or do you not want to tell me roughly what sector you're in?
We're in the energy sector.
Okay.
And
of those 40, how many were from overseas?
18.
Okay. And how hard is it to get suitable candidates now, post-Brexit?
It is very hard.
Right. And this would make it harder in a way. What Keir Starmer is describing, as you understand it, would make it harder.
Yes. I mean, the visa application process is a nightmare, getting through to the Home Office. It's a lottery system if you want to get priority. If you phone them up and you're honest that you think that they're racist, they'll hang up on you because you're not allowed to call them racist.
Right.
It's really frustrating to actually recruit people. And we just want the best people. I don't care where they come from. I just want the best people.
You see, let me be the devil's advocate here then, and say that possibly the training he refers to would address the problems you've just described. It would make sure that they were more. I mean, the sense of entitlement that you talk about is very upsetting, I think, for all of us, for everybody, because you You want your young people to grow up thinking that they are worthy of any role, that there should be no doors closed to them, that they're, that is for the likes of us or that is for the likes of them. But there's a pendulum, isn't it? And the pendulum can swing too far to what you describe, which sounds very much like a sense of ill-founded entitlement. But what if the plan to train British candidates for the job, and I'm pushing you now to quite a personal ideological position of your own that I want to examine, it is in any way preferable to have the queue consisting of homegrown candidates than foreign candidates? And if we posit the existence of equal calibre,
I think when you look at calibre, you've got to look beyond academic training.
Yes, no, I know, but I'm imagining. I mean, it's a theoretical applicant cohort of equal calibre. Can you see any case at all for prioritising homegrown candidates over foreign candidates for the reasons that Keir Starmer has at least nodded to today?
No.
Okay, because I think I can. A bit.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But then I'm not hiring people on a regular basis like you are.
No, and, it goes beyond. I mean, I have a huge frustration with borders when it comes to migration. I think the big trick that the West in particular is missing is, with pensions and cost of living and obligations to the NHS, etc.
Yes.
We need people to pay tax. It's as simple as that.
Yes. So I'd hear you. And for the record, I agree with you about the importance of where somebody comes from. But I can see the thinking of people who don't. And I can understand why Keir Starmer is essentially appealing to them. I think of it as food, right? And maybe this will help us both have a better understanding of people that frustrate us. I think particularly post the invasion of Ukraine, and I mean, Brexit is obviously something we're going to have to leave out of this conversation. But the idea of being self-sufficient on food is a good idea, right? In an uncertain world, it would be better to be growing and providing more of our own food from within our own borders. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Well, then I just substitute food for workforce, and we perhaps come to a slightly better understanding of people that we find a bit hard to understand at the moment.
And I do think that our workforce would, could be better equipped.
Yes.
But it's not about technical training. It's not about conventional theory on education. It's about learning to interact with people. It's about attitude. It's about, understanding that you've got to earn what you want in life.
I hear you. And as a big employer, I want to argue. You're the big employer. I'm not. I want to argue with you, but I can't because I don't have anything to draw upon except the young people I work with who are largely wonderful, with a few glorious exceptions. Keith, you're not. You're neither young nor wonderful, mate. I don't know what you're grinning about. Ed, thank you. That was really helpful. Really helpful. We'll continue the conversation with hopefully similar levels of insight and honesty. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. 26 minutes to 12 is the time. And I'll add to this list now employers who want to respond to the suggestion that the British economy needs to be helped from its immigration dependency. I mean, I find it helpful to swap the words workforce for food. And then you can perhaps conceive of an ideology or a political belief that thinks that it would be better to be more self-sufficient in an uncertain world. Flies in the face slightly of Winston Churchill's vision for Europe, the indivisible four freedoms of the European Union. But it's going to be a while before we return to the territory of Brexit and European Union membership, whether you like that or not. I'm sorry, it's not an opinion, it's just counting. So if you swap workforce for food, there is good sense. Even though you may have freedom of movement of goods and freedom of movement of labour, the closer it is to where it's needed, the better. I just think that's helpful. So what do you say as an employer to Keir Starmer's suggestion that you have become too dependent on cheap foreign labour? And what is the alternative? Because training people to do jobs doesn't remove the need for unskilled workers. I just, the more you think about it, the more confusing this speech becomes. But the less you think about it, the better it looks, which is why right-wing media loves it, or seems to love it. Great news. Rupert in Bicester was the listener I sent away a couple of weeks ago with some homework, and he's back now to report. It wasn't Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner. It was Angela Rayner and Jess Phillips, I think, that I told you to listen to the podcast, Rupert. How did you get on? Thank you for ringing in.
It was actually, yeah. It was Angela Rayner, Jess Phillips, and David Lammy. So I found two out of the three. And so I was the sort of lifelong Tory voter. Said, look, I'm really struggling now to vote Tory because of where they've gone. And actually, I really like Keir Starmer. I think he's a principled politician. But what really worries me
that was it. I remember the call now.
Around him.
You said you didn't think much of the people around him, and I said, oh, well, give these three a chance, and you found two of them.
So Angela Rayner, a lot of respect for, really. Obviously came through the School of Hard Knocks. And I thought she'd be very sort of anti-class, but, she had massive confidence in her own ability, to basically take on management and, really respected her. And actually she, I thought I'd be very sort of anti-Angela Rayner. Jess Phillips, less so. I think, Jess Phillips had had a lot of opportunity. Angela Rayner didn't. Jess Phillips had gone to grammar school. But she just seems to have sort of this rebellious streak, and sort of anti-middle class, anti-Tory agenda because of the sort of staunch family background in the Labour Party, no matter what. If you'd been to private school, if you'd have any kind of privilege, then you weren't in her.
You're the enemy.
Sort of
I don't. I mean,
exactly.
I mean, you listened to the podcast. That's how she came across to you. She is mates with Jacob Rees-Mogg, which slightly flies in the face. Was my problem with her was the opposite of yours. I didn't think she was ideological enough in her social choices, but there we are.
But so I think I thought they'd be sort of as a Tory would describe slightly loony left, but actually they came across as relatively sensible people.
And you didn't find the Lammy one wasn't on Full Disclosure. I remembered after saying goodbye to you. It was on a series that I absolutely used to that I used to do, and it then evolved into Full Disclosure. It was on something called Unfiltered, which you can also get on the Global Player app. Actually, we're talking about the Full Disclosure podcast series that I present for Global, and Rupert's experiences, his work with the two prominent female Labour MPs. So overall, are we looking at a 52-48% improvement in your perceptions of that front bench? Well, she's not on the front bench actually, Jess Phillips. So you could argue that Keir Starmer reflects your.
Yeah, I think we probably are. I just think it's kind of impossible to vote for the Tories in their current status. I think it would have been interesting had there been a general election after Liz Truss, because I think then Labour would have had to face quite a difficult bill to sort out. But I suppose Richie is a guy that gave the money out, so now he's got to sort out how it's paid back.
Yes, and his own party don't seem to understand that.
No, so
Interesting times.
It's there for them to sort out. But I think also on the speech this morning, I think Keir struggled because he was trying to appeal to Labour voters in ending cheap Labour and everybody's going to have a better rate, whilst also sort of appealing to us Tories on, immigration will go down.
Yes.
Well, I don't think you can have both.
I don't
One's going to have to give. And I think that was probably, he's trying to appease everybody.
Well, it's good. Well, that's why I suggested it was good politics but bad policy. The less you think about it, the better it looks. But you've thought about it. You've made the mistake of thinking about it, and then the contradictions begin to emerge. Unless other callers can describe this constituency of people to us in a convincing way, and we'd have to acknowledge we just didn't realise it existed previously.
Not sure it does. But
no, I'm not sure it does. And if it does, they get trained, they do better jobs. Who does the jobs they were doing before?
Yeah, I suppose, look, I mean, there's a great sort of force, isn't there, that thinks, there's a massive amount of people unemployed, why aren't they working? Which, of course, yes, everybody would love to see.
But the answers to that are fairly clear.
But
they're not.
Exactly. It's not possible to take. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah.
Some of them will be, nowhere near enough to fill the vacancies that the country currently faces. And unemployment is actually at a historic low at the moment. It's pretty much the lowest that it's ever been. But there are people who are carers who qualify as being unemployed, people who are caring for members of their own family, people who are poorly, people who are not recognised as poorly but feel within themselves unable to work. And also, what jobs are they going to do? This was the Tory came out of this yesterday, didn't he? The fella down in Kent. We need to put people to work who don't currently want to work. Would you want them on your workforce?
Well, there's that ideological view, isn't there?
Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? This is what your grade depends on this for your homework. Would you want them on your workforce?
No, because it just wouldn't be productive enough.
You got an A.
But that's no excuse to have them sitting at home.
I agree. But they're two different questions, aren't they? It's not, we must put them to work. Where? Also, I think we'd probably disagree about the size of the cohort, but you get an A for your homework, and I'm very grateful to you for doing that. I really am. You don't need to listen to the Starmer one because you've already got a warm opinion of him. But there we go, 52%, 48, the infernal ratio. That was the vote on Twitter. I don't know if you saw it. To bring Donald Trump back onto Twitter was 52-48, but that, of course, was a vote from people who happen to have seen Elon Musk's tweet, so not the most representative sample perhaps ever taken. Rupert, thank you, mate. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the fact that you were listening when I said, well, where's that fella gone that I gave the homework to? Because it really should have been my job. I should have jotted down your name, kept a note of your number, and then called you back up several weeks later. That's what a proper professional radio host would have done. So thank you for papering over the cracks of my own competence. Chris is in Colchester to steer us back to Keir Starmer. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
Big fan, all that
All
stuff.
Of that rubbish. Carry on.
So I do agree with Keir Starmer's, the sentiments of his speech anyway, about, we do need to, as a country, need to invest more in our young people. Which I think is what he was trying to say.
I don't know that he is saying. I mean, I agree. I don't know if anyone would disagree with that, but that is a generational change, isn't it? That's not going to fix problems we've got now. That's going to fix problems when young people emerge from education and training ready for work.
I mean, you're right when you say that it's not a quick fix.
Yeah.
But over the last 12 years of Tory government, any schemes that did exist or any sort of incentives for businesses to take on people, all that sort of stuff, it isn't there anymore in a lot of places.
That's completely true. And the bit I don't know, and you might know more about this than me, is that those people who could have benefited from apprenticeships, I suppose we're thinking of, aren't we, or could have benefited simply from better vocational training, better education, call it what you will, and have therefore not achieved their full potential. Is it the case, do you think, that people overseas in other European countries, because this addresses freedom of movement of labour within the European Union, they are being trained to a higher standard in places like Romania and Poland and France and Germany and Spain and Portugal and Hungary. And they are being trained to a higher standard there, and then they are coming over here to do the jobs that British people have not been able to do because they've been let down by education and training? Because that's the bit I struggle with, Chris.
Yeah, it certainly feels like that. I mean, I don't know if part of it is that are people in those countries more willing to put in the effort, if you like, in order to. Yeah, I need to do this because then I can go to the UK and make my life 10 times better.
Yes, but they've got the better training. This is the bit I struggle with.
I don't think. I don't know, is the honest answer. I don't know if they get better training over there.
Well, they must do for Keir Starmer's theory to work, though. They are coming here because they are better trained and therefore more employable than the people that he says we should be training instead to wean ourselves off a dependency on immigration. Oh, he doesn't use the word wean. That's my problem.
The training that they've got is probably to the same standard that we probably should still have.
Right.
Or should be doing. And it's just where we've lagged behind, and now we're in a situation where...
Or you've got equally trained people, and I think this existed particularly in the construction sector. You've got equally trained people, but the Polish lad is prepared to do the same job for less money than the British lad. When I first started here, I was constantly hearing tales of builders sleeping 24 to a bed and cutting British tradesmen out of the industry altogether. And although there were exaggerations and embellishments, and it was still within recent memory that British builders were routinely talked about as being cowboys, there was clearly some truth in that analysis as well. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been so many Eastern European lads working on building sites.
Yeah, but then you get the same, people that come over from Romania, that they end up getting labelled with the bad, it's hard with the same brush of, I had one bad experience with one, so they're all rubbish, they're all lazy.
Yeah, that's true.
But you're right. I mean, in the job I used to do, we used builders a lot, and over time we noticed that more and more they were outsourcing to foreign labour, and I'm not sure whether that was just because we didn't have our own people that were skilled in bricklaying or stuff, or whether it was just the attitude.
That's the big question, isn't it? And from Keir Starmer's point of view, the reality doesn't matter as much as the perception. If the perception is that is a problem and he announces it's a problem and that he's going to fix it, if there isn't a problem, he's not going to get into any trouble for not fixing it.
Yeah, I mean, training and stuff isn't going to fix.
No.
we think we've got an attitude problem in this country with younger people or people that think they should be doing better jobs.
I mean, you're the second caller to say that, and I can't argue with you.
I don't have any personal experience.
No, nor do I.
Of it, of the attitude issue, but you hear it a lot.
You do.
People say that they don't want to work. Well, I don't know if that's true. I just don't think they've been given either the encouragement at school, right back at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Because some people go to school and they're not there to learn. They don't, it doesn't work for them. But they are good, at making things or doing things. But if they're not,
they're being let down, perhaps, and it's very hard to find them. We tried to do it last week. Just wondering whether there are, as a couple of callers suggested, large numbers of younger people who are almost economically inactive because they still live at home. They still live with mum and dad. They've never moved out, which has definitely increased enormously in recent years, and therefore they only need PIN money. And they do a bit of this and a bit of that, and I don't know. I mean, but that would be one area where, if Keir Starmer is talking undiluted sense, that would be one area that is clearly a lot bigger than the rest of us appreciate. Chris, thank you, mate. And as Julian Suffolk points out, British builders used to go all over Europe, so it actually cuts both ways. Most famously, of course, in that rather splendid televisual entertainment, Auf Wiedersehen, Pet. 11:47 is the time. It's 8 minutes to 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I love the fact that Rupert in Bicester has reminded many of you of Shirley. You remember Shirley, who rang in last week to tell us, we were talking about the cuts to the English National Opera, and Shirley rang in to say that she'd saved up. No, her daughter had treated her to a ticket to the opera. She'd never seen live opera before. And she went along and she described it in the most magnificent of terms. I know that you were just as moved by it as I was. And while we were talking to Shirley, the English National Opera got in touch and offered her some tickets for their current show, The Yeoman of the Guard. And it was beautiful because her husband hadn't been with her to the last one. She'd only got one ticket for Christmas, and the English National Opera invited her and her husband. Jen in Stilton, for example, is saying, James, totally unrelated, but has Shirley been with her husband to the opera yet? Please keep us updated. We'll be catching up with Shirley a little later in this programme to find out whether or not that promise has been kept and that treat has been delivered. 11:53 is the time. I'm going to play you a little clip of Gary Neville because I haven't listened to it yet, and I haven't decided what we're doing in the next hour. When I've listened to the clip of Gary Neville, I'll decide whether we're going to discuss some of the issues raised by Gary Neville in the clip I haven't listened to yet for our conversation in the next hour. That is what you call professionalism, you see, in action. Before that, we'll talk to Sam in Crystal Palace about Keir Starmer's speech. Sam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Thanks
mate.
for having me on the radio show. Great show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think, based on what I heard from Keir Starmer, I think that there's an element of a reality here whereby the British economy is less productive than our peers, especially our European peers.
Yes.
And when you look at the economic data, for example, it does show that, for example, an average German worker can quit halfway through Thursday in any given working week, having produced the same amount of economic output as the average British worker.
But, and you probably know the but that's coming, you need to then look at how much that company has invested in equipment, research and development over the last 20 years in order to make sure that every worker is maximising the productivity they could, because it sounds like a criticism of British workers. It sounds like we're calling them lazy, and I know that you're not, you see.
Yes, 100% not, no. So, yeah, exactly. So, it's not just, it's everything. It's infrastructure, public transport infrastructure. It's how easy is it to get to work? It's the training of the management of and all of that kind of stuff. It's so many things. How many people? I know quite a few people that live in various European countries. How many people do you know that live in these other countries spend more than an hour travelling to work? We have loads of people in the UK travelling more than an hour to get to work.
That's a really, really good point. And do you know what else you've just made me realise is that perhaps, and I don't want to be 100% on this because it's becoming my sort of answer to almost every problem, but creating the idea that it's poorly paid immigrants that are responsible for our for some of the issues you've just described, lets off the hook the people who are really responsible for the absence of investment in research and development or transport or higher wages or whatever it may be, which is the culture of ripping dividends out of the heart of every business to the maximum degree. So getting rewards, we think naively that a business is dedicated to the interests of its customers, and the better it looks after its customers, the better the business will do. We know that's nonsense. Just look at water. I think Severn Trent Water today has posted profits that are, stratospheric. And that's because the business is dedicated to making as much money as they possibly can for their shareholders. So it's a funny one, isn't it? It's an interesting pendulum.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so there's the sort of lack of investment in private companies. I mean, you look at, we don't have enough sort of companies that grow up to be sort of mid-sized companies because, when we've invented something amazing in the universities, which we have amazing universities and incredible scientists, and they create something, it doesn't grow enough to become, a mid-sized company, and then they sort of take over the world in other countries, like they do in other countries.
Yeah, who is Starmer talking to then?
Well, I think you've probably hit the nail on the head with, like, if you think about it in depth, then it kind of slightly, there are holes in it. But if you look at the headlines, it works well. So it's playing well to the people he wants to win back, I suppose, politically. But I think as well, there's a certain appreciation from business. And, I work in a consultancy organisation, and we kind of understand that we've got to, as collectively, and this is not about any individual person, like you said at the top of this my call here, but we've all got to up our game in terms of becoming a lot more productive as a nation. I mean, there are so many different policy areas that this touches on. Look at housing, for example. A lot of people would say, oh, yes, but, they've got the ability to live close to their work in another country because their housing is cheaper. But we forget, for example, that Germany is as densely populated as we are, yet for some reason they can all live closer to their place of work than we can.
Infrastructure and investment and the opposite, if you like, of that popular 1980s ideology of free markets, which continue, of course, to banjack this country in so many ways. Sam, I'm moving on only because I just noticed, I'm sure she's going to be absolutely brilliant anyway, but I've just noticed that Jade is calling from Hagley. And there is a particular reason why Hagley is newsworthy today, Jade, isn't there?
I'm not sure. I may have missed the news. I'm sorry.
What?
Apologies.
Who scored?
What's the newsworthiness that's going on here?
Who scored the first of 6 goals in England's match against Iran yesterday?
I apologise. I didn't watch the football yesterday. I'm very sorry. I'm very behind the curve.
But your name is almost the same. Your name is almost the same as his. You are Jade.
You have to share with me the person that did it.
Jude Bellingham. Jude Bellingham, Hagley's most famous son, except possibly Adrian Childs.
That's an embarrassing start to the call, isn't it? Apologies.
Not really. I was hoping you wouldn't know because it makes for more amusing radio, you see. But they were playing. He was discovered. Jude Bellingham was discovered playing with his brother in a park in Hagley near Stourbridge.
Wow. I've learned something new today, which is what life is all about. So thank you. That's brilliant.
Can you remember why you rang in?
I can remember why, and I wanted to share with you what I believe is something that we're kind of missing a trick about in this country when it comes to how we fill very many employment gaps that we have across the board. And the issue, unfortunately, is that we're missing a trick with women. Lots of women who have left the workforce predominantly because they are looking after their children. And so I'm one of those people. I left the workforce 4.5 years ago to look after my relatively newborn daughter. And I've worked as a consultant around her for those past 4.5 years. I am one of many women who do this. We leave behind our careers. We've, been educated. We've worked our way up the ladder. And then we have children. And we find 2 things that are an issue. One, childcare is enormously expensive and oftentimes
I wonder if it's a vote winner. It's a funny one, that, isn't it? Because, we touched on this last week when we were talking about where are these people going to come from. And one of the best callers was a mum pointing out that when her little one starts primary school, she's suddenly free again. Yeah. Her passage back into the workplace is difficult.
It's really challenging. It's challenging because, regrettably, we have organisational structures and contracts that don't want to become more flexible. They, for example, offer 28 days holiday. Yeah. Well, we all know that children are out of school for very many more days than 28 days. So the hours of the working day, 9 to 5. Do you do this for? Is this you? I'm running out of time now. It's my fault for using up some of your minutes banging on about Jude Bellingham. But are you speaking just as an ordinary punter, or is this something that you actually have an interest in professionally? Because you sound incredibly well informed and articulate. If you don't mind me saying, all my callers do, but you in particular today. That's very kind, thank you. So my background is people and talent consultancy. I was the head of HR for a fintech before I set up my own consultancy. I did a master's degree in the last 4 years where I focused on why talented women are leaving the workforce.
Look at my antennae. Look at my antennae twitching away while you were talking, because you clearly have a depth of knowledge that I hope I will be able to benefit from again in the future. So, Keir Starmer, by all means, play to the gallery with your comments about immigration. But if you really want to improve British productivity and British business, help all these mums back into the workforce in as an efficient and speedy a way as possible. Jade, thank you. And I should just say that he wasn't discovered playing football in a park in Hagley. I was over-romanticising. Jude Bellingham's dad, Mark, is a legend in the West Midlands. Apart from Kidderminster Harriers, he scored a ton of goals for pretty much every single club in the area. And I think he stepped down. I think he's just retired as a sergeant in the West Midlands Police. So I'm gonna make a decision soon on who is Hagley's most famous son, whether it's Jude Bellingham or Adrian Childs, who talked a little bit about Hagley on the Full Disclosure podcast recently. But I need to tell you also that if you think Jude Bellingham's good, the word on the street is that Job, his little brother, who's currently on the books at Birmingham City, is possibly even better. God, it all happens on this show, doesn't it? It's 12:02. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. Do you want to see how the programme works? Shall we pretend that Toto has come into the room and pulled back the curtain to reveal this slightly doddery old geezer behind the microphone instead of the all-powerful Wizard of Oz, the mighty Oz? This is how it works. Here's a clip of Gary Neville chatting football on ITV Football yesterday, in which he says stuff that is apparently very interesting and thought-provoking, but which I forgot to listen to before I came on air today. I know what you're thinking. I could have listened to it during the news, but I had to go to the loo, so I didn't. And then we'll decide whether or not we're going to use it as a launchpad into a conversation about the World Cup, Qatar, and other issues. Or, if I don't find it as interesting as my colleagues tell me I will, we'll return to the question of Keir Starmer's speech, because I want Theo Usherwood to talk to us about the story you just heard in the news about MPs being, well, the Daily Mail essentially painting more targets on the backs of politicians this morning by writing, "You pay for MPs' parties as cost of living bites and taxes rise. Outrage as it's revealed." Who are you supposed to get cross with looking at that front page? I thought our news bulletin did it very well, did it much better, explaining what is going on and why. That front page is designed to make you hate politicians. Full stop. That's why it's designed to do. That is it. It's a ticket for the ghost train. So we'll have a look at why it's rancid shortly. And then we'll catch up with the opposite of rancid. We'll catch up with Shirley, who has hopefully been to the opera, although it's going to be a bit of a climb down for me if she hasn't. 7 minutes after 12 is the time. Here is Gary Neville talking on ITV Football yesterday.
Last night, Ian Wright, he had his say on being here, and he said he felt quite conflicted. I just wondered how you feel, Gary.
I don't feel conflicted. I've been coming over to the Middle East for 20 years and to Southeast Asia. I've had sporting, business and commercial relationships with these parts of the world for a long, long time. And the fact that FIFA have awarded a World Cup to Qatar in the last few weeks, that's come under huge scrutiny. I accept that position. I'm there to be shot at, and people have criticised me heavily. They've criticised our colleagues on the BBC yesterday for being over here. But the reality of it is, my view on it is quite simply that, I detest workers' rights abuses. I hate the idea of people not being paid enough money, people working in poor conditions, the idea of people not having good accommodation, the fact that women's rights aren't adhered to, or that there are human rights abuses. I can't stand it. But I also have relationships in this part of the world, and I've done for many, many years. And those relationships are long-standing. Those relationships are long-standing in our country with the UK. If you think about the fact that we buy most of our energy from the Middle East, that they own our banks, that the royal family have relationships with the Middle East, both sporting and charitable. You think about our government, our political parties have relationships with the Middle East. They own London Heathrow Airport, they own London Stock Exchange. And the fact of the matter is, it's football that's actually brought the scrutiny, and football tournaments that have brought the scrutiny on these challenges that exist in this part of the world and the way in which these things happen. And from my point of view, I'm happy for football to front that up. If Prince William doesn't want to come to this tournament, but he's OK with not coming to the tournament, but his father takes, if you like, charitable donations, that's fine. If the political MPs don't want to come over here, but they're happy to take money from them in our country for their political parties, that's fine with me. But I always see it as football and ex-football players who seem to be coming under criticism. And from my point of view, I have to say that I think that football stands up, football players stand up. We've got another issue today with the One Love armband with Harry Kane, these political and social issues, which I'm absolutely delighted to talk about. I think there's a serious conversation to be had, because my point always is, Should there be a World Cup in all parts of the world? Should there be a World Cup in the Middle East? Should there be a World Cup in Arab countries? There absolutely should be. And if we're going to do that, then we are going to come across some of these issues that exist in these parts of the world where we don't agree with them. But can you not enjoy a sporting tournament and come over here and challenge the system over here, but also bring football to different parts of the world and try and advance things and impact things? And I will continue to keep coming to this part of the world. I'll continue to keep going to parts of Southeast Asia. Other sectors like energy sectors, our Air Force, our banks, our political parties, they seem to want to shy away from their existing relationships that they have with this part of the world. But football will get the scrutiny. Football will be the one that gets penalised for it. And I personally have been hammered over this last few weeks. And that's fine. But I'm happy to stand up and debate it because I think there's a serious conversation to be had about where sporting competitions should be held. And I believe they strongly should be held in the Middle East.
I think that's absolutely fascinating. I also think perhaps, and I hope you don't think less of me for suggesting this, I think perhaps Gary's been listening to us a little bit over the last couple of weeks because he picked off many of the points that we made, and we were very surprised to discover, and I don't think he was across some of those points when Ian Hislop gave him a rinsing on Have I Got News For You a few weeks ago, because I was stunned to discover just how much of the United Kingdom Qatar owned, and I'd forgotten that the former Prime Minister had given the then Prince Charles something like €3 million in used notes in carrier bags. Yes, for his charitable foundations, but the stock exchange, Severn Trent Water, posh hotels, Canary Wharf, the Shard, 10 billion quid that Boris Johnson, that's something else that Gary Neville there was referring to, 10 billion quid of investment that Boris Johnson was doing a lap of honour about shortly before he ceased to be Prime Minister, and yet it was Gary Neville who got rinsed by Ian Hislop on Have I Got News For You, and it was football commentators and to a lesser extent footballers who were being attacked for their apparent, what's the word you want, complicity in the regime in Qatar. I mean, that is a long clip, and I'm tempted to play it to you again. I don't think I will because it is so long. But I think he's absolutely knocked it out of the park. So I might just do, if this works, Hislop versus Neville. Because Hislop's argument on Have I Got News For You, and I've never met Gary Neville, I'm a huge admirer of Ian Hislop, and I agree with him almost always, but I think I disagree with him on this. And I think Gary Neville has gone away and done his homework and really come up with a powerful case for why. And listen, there is one little quibble here that there is, which he doesn't address because he was talking on ITV News, ITV Football. But he is also doing work, as far as I'm aware, for the Qatari state broadcaster, which is, I think it puts a slightly different complexion on things. But in terms of not going, or taking the money and not taking the money, not being part of it or being part of it, I found that a really compelling and convincing account of why it is ridiculous to single out football in this way for collusion, if you like, or complicity with a regime that is responsible for some truly vile abuses and laws. So I'll give you a little reminder of the Have I Got News For You clip that he was clearly referring to or alluding to when he talked about all of the criticism he'd received in recent weeks for being involved at all.
You know David Beckham, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's going, isn't he?
Yeah.
How much has he been paid?
I don't know.
You do know.
More than me.
Yeah.
Ian, is it coming home?
What, your reputation?
The others have been very gentle with you, Gary, but
thanks, Ian.
The elephant in the room is still there. I mean, you're commentating there, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm commentating there.
And what's the defence? Football term.
I'm commentating there. Well, you've got a choice, I think, haven't you?
What, going or not going?
Well, my view always has been that you either highlight the issues and challenges in these countries and speak about them, or you basically don't say anything, you stay back home and don't go. And I've always said we should challenge them.
There's another option. You stay at home and highlight the abuses. You don't have to go and take the Qataris' money. I'm not trying to be tiresome, but, I mean, it's not a very good defence.
And how is someone like Robbie or the Black Eyed Peas supposed to highlight it? Are they going to make a speech on the stage? Of course they're not.
You can highlight it.
What, during a match?
Well, highlight it during the commentary.
It's the kick-off here in this appalling country. human rights record, and honestly, I think, someone's kicking a ball, but honestly, the amount of immigrant workers who've died, it's a shocker. Oh, it's a goal!
They did do that, actually, didn't they? So I laughed along with the audience there when Ian Hislop made that point, and then the BBC in particular opened up their coverage of the World Cup in Qatar with a fairly impassioned critique of the human rights abuses on a football programme. It was Gary Lineker that delivered it, like a mini panorama, I think he called it. So I think we'll have a chat about whether or not Gary Neville was actually right all along. The usual newspapers were queuing up to give him the mother of all kickings, and you can predict that pundits who've been proved completely wrong about Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, free market economics, you name it, they've been proved completely wrong about it. They were writing columns about how Gary Neville can never offer an opinion again. He is a completely busted flush. How these people sleep at night is beyond me. It really is. The absolute idiocy of people who are paid for opinions that are being proved wrong on a daily basis, suggesting that Gary Neville can never offer an opinion again because Ian Hislop pulled his pants down on Have I Got News For You, is staggering, isn't it? But I think I can't remember when we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, I think I was probably closer to Team Hislop than Team Neville. And then I did my research. Then I found out about all the investment that Qatar has in this country. I remembered that the King had taken millions of euros in used notes from a former Prime Minister of the country for his... that cough was deliberate, by the way. I'm not suggesting that the money wasn't for his charity. That was a tickle in my throat, to be completely clear. And then, given the choice, go or not go, that's the choice here, go or not go, and that by going you are somehow colluding, I think Ian Hislop was wrong and Gary Neville was right. And I think that was one of the best contributions to public discourse that I've ever heard in the context of a sports programme. Since the last one, which was Gary Lineker doing exactly what Ian Hislop was sneering about. And I will say sneering, even though I really like Ian Hislop, but I think this is the first time in recorded history that I've ever disagreed with him. What do you think? Hislop or Neville? 0345 6060 973. And before we head towards the junction, I can tell you that Saudi Arabia, and don't adjust your radio, Saudi Arabia have just beaten Argentina in the first round of the World Cup. I'll say that again. Whether it adds, diminishes, or makes no impact at all upon Gary Neville's point about the importance of taking these tournaments to countries that may have unpleasant human rights records, and I don't think Qatar's record is, and it's not worse than Russia's. I think there's an argument for saying that it's possibly better. It's certainly a more open country than Russia, which held the last World Cup. But Saudi Arabia have just beaten Argentina in the World Cup. There are some words I bet you thought you'd never hear. Your calls on Neville versus Hislop after this. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. There's an editorial in the Times today that under the headline Doha Dream says, now that the World Cup has started, it is time to stop the demonisation of Qatar and enjoy the football. I would need to know what Rupert Murdoch's business interests in the Emirate are before I can pass proper and full comment on that claim, but it seems to me to be heading in completely the wrong direction compared to Gary Neville's contention that you go there and you talk about the bad stuff, which has arguably given him a late winner in extra time during his confrontation with Ian Hislop on Have I Got News For You a few weeks ago. If you're just tuning in, I've played all the clips. I can't play them again because we'll run out of time. Arthur is in Manchester. Arthur, what would you like to say?
I think Gary Neville is still wrong, and I think we shouldn't have sent a team to the World Cup and they should have been boycotted in a much more serious way. And it would have been a much more effective protest than going and quote unquote highlighting the issue.
Would we have covered it?
I don't think it matters. This is
well,
the
I'm
issue.
just asking. I'm in your theoretical universe. Would we have covered it? We're not there already, but the tournament's gone ahead anyway. Would we have covered it on mainstream UK media?
Probably, and I think that would also have been an issue. But I think covering, when you said covered it, I thought you meant you were referring to the abuses. And I think my main point on this is that it doesn't really matter what the quote-unquote international community says about the human rights abuses in Qatar to the Qataris. It's not a democratic regime. It's a country where only about 10% of the people who live there are Qatari citizens. They have no democratic exercise at all.
No, but this was an exercise in public relations, which has backfired because of all the protests.
I'm not sure the backfiring I'm not sure it's going to have a long-term negative effect on Qatar. I mean,
I don't think I'm going to hear the word Qatar again without thinking about human rights abuses and deaths, and that may be unfair.
Did you not think that before?
Not in the same way. Not in the same way. One's only got so much bandwidth. But presumably then, and this is not a criticism, it's simply a question, we shouldn't have played in the last World Cup in Russia either.
No.
And we shouldn't have gone to, and we shouldn't have gone to the Winter Olympics in China.
I would say no. And I would say,
okay, well, I admire your consistency, but you recognise how unrealistic that is.
No, I don't. I don't think it is. I think you're
we'd have missed 2 World Cups. We'd have missed at least 1 Winter Olympics. I can't off the top of my head.
And nobody would have joined us. I mean, the thing is,
of course nobody would have joined us.
Look, you're talking about having you're talking about a system where we're going to these countries saying we're going to highlight the issues, we're going to highlight the problems.
It's not a great phone line, which is a shame, because I can't keep. I'm not going to be able to keep you on for as long as I want to. But just finally, I want you to address. I'm not being glib. I know the arguments you're making, but I want you to address the points that Gary Neville made about football being singled out for this kind of demand. And you are. Well, I said the phone line was bad. I didn't know you were. Crikey, what's that? You better get out, Arthur. I'll check up on you later. No, it's all right. It's stopped. The King took millions of euros in. Oh, he's gone. No, crikey. Whew, it's all happening today, isn't it? I've already said that. Honestly, I got it out of the box too early. Lewis is in Bethnal Green. Lewis, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, hi, James.
Can you smell smoke?
Not where I am.
Carry on.
I'm going to try and play like a bit of a devil's advocate. So when I first watched Ian
as long as you mean what you're saying, it has to be your true view.
It will, but
right. Okay, then.
So when I was first watching Have I Got News for You, when Ian Hislop called out Gary Neville, I was cheering. I was like, great point, Ian. I often agree with a lot of the things that he says and calls out. But, spending more time since that clip has come out and thinking about it, and, we want to call out all the human rights abuses in Qatar. Do we isolate them? Like, what is the answer to making that country progress to a point where it's, what we would call acceptable? I'm a gay man. I absolutely advocate for a lot of the boycotting that's going on. I'm not gonna call out anybody who's going over there to do their job specifically. And what I mean by that, like people like Alex Scott, she's just a presenter. She's there for the BBC.
She wore an armband yesterday when Harry Kane didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also another difficult point as well. But I will come back to the Ian Hislop point and the Gary Neville thing. The thing with that is I somewhat agree with Gary, but at the time as well, I don't. It's difficult in the sense of, how do we make Qatar better? If the point is like we don't want these things to happen and they shouldn't be happening because it's atrocious. We've had about 8,000 migrant workers died since 2010. We have gay people getting imprisoned and executed and whatever else that's going on over there. But at the same time, how do we make that country better? So if you look at the record of the world in terms of human rights, would the UK have the right to gay marriage now if other countries didn't? Because we almost gain these things through attrition. So obviously, the Netherlands was the first country in the world to pass a gay marriage law back in, I think, 2001. And, it kind of went from there as every other year it was another Western country that kept, approving that. And would those other countries have done it? And would that pressure have been built if it wasn't for other countries influencing them? So to get to my point is, how do we help Qatar become more progressive and stop these human rights laws from being abused? Do we completely isolate them and let them not be involved in any international event whatsoever? Or do we actually go ahead and, just be the best that we can be and, do these events and show them that, the Western world isn't so scary and, it's...
And I thought...
Do you kind of get my point?
I do get your point. No, I think it's a powerful point. And you're doing a better job than I am on resisting the binary, although I think should we... Whether you're talking about commentators or players, should we have gone is a binary question. It doesn't admit the nuance that you've brought to the broader issues.
Yeah.
And Arthur's point was quite pertinent, wasn't it? About 90% of the population, or at least the country's residents, are migrant workers. So whose minds are we trying to change? I don't imagine that it's possible to be a poor Qatari, is it? I imagine there's so much money swilling around that everybody's minted. And so are they going to think, maybe we should change the state? Well, they have improved labour laws since winning the World Cup, and they have strengthened some of the areas that we talk about. But I guess we just live in that alternative counterfactual, isn't it? In Arthur's world, we wouldn't have gone, and would we ever have shone anything like as much of a spotlight on Qatar that we have done?
Yeah, and to be that devil's advocate as well, because on one side of it, do we isolate them or do we not? On the other side of it, at what point is actually, you get all these people who say, keep politics out of football. At what point does that stop?
They're idiots.
So if this was 2022 and Russia was hosting this World Cup and everything that's happened over the last year in Ukraine still happened, would people be saying to the players, you shouldn't be wearing Stop the War armbands? Would there be as much backlash if it was Stop the War versus, an LGBTQ armband?
Well, it would have been. I mean, I don't.
Would it have gone ahead?
No, I hear you. I would pick up on that, though. I tried to address the difference yesterday between political and humanitarian, and I failed because I think that I think it's different. I think gay rights is not a political issue. I think it's a humanitarian issue. But and war is political rather than humanitarian, but it has absolutely unavoidable humanitarian ramifications. So many grey areas, so many nuances. But in a big nutshell, better to go than to not go, as long as you do something to draw attention to the stuff you're objecting to. The other point to make, of course, is the Times is right that Russia and China got more or less a free pass. Even as the abuses of the Uyghurs were making news in other parts of the media, the Winter Olympics unfolded without anything like this level of attention or criticism of I don't know who covers it. Is it Claire Balding? Who covers the Winter Olympics for the broadcasters? They didn't seem to get any of the jip that Gary Neville and, to a lesser extent, Gary Lineker have received.
Yeah, I think the difference with that is it's just simple terms of geography. The question has come up a lot of times is why didn't we care as much about, Yemen and Syria?
It is a bit of
Ukraine?
whataboutery, isn't it? You're right.
Yeah.
Do you want to hear the best whataboutery ever?
Go on.
This is from Nick, who says, in 1966, homosexuality was illegal in England. Should we have boycotted that World Cup?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That's the year my dad was born. And, like many things as well, when I was growing up, my dad used to make the odd, homophobic joke, as a lot of people did. And, by me coming out as I'm older, he's completely acceptable of that now. And it's kind of like, when do you draw the line of, if my dad was a celebrity and he said something, homophobic 20 years ago, he could get cancelled now. But
he could, if it was on social media or if someone dug out the tape. I don't know if he'd actually get cancelled, but he'd certainly have questions to answer. David Baddiel last night on his Jews Don't Count documentary, addressing very directly and for many people unsatisfactorily, although I thought it was very powerful, his blackface when he was taking the mickey out of the Nottingham Forest striker Jason Lee all those years ago. So you're right. I just don't know that. I just balk a bit at the word cancelled, but I know you didn't mean it in that way. Lewis, you've taken me all the way up to the news without any fire alarms going off, which means that's happened once out of the last two calls. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 12:34 is the time. Dominic Raab, remember him? Number 10 is expected to appoint an individual today, possibly, certainly soon, to investigate Dominic Raab claims, which are coming thick and fast at the moment. Claims of inappropriate behaviour, bullying in his government roles. It's understood, Pippa Crerar of The Guardian reports that they'll have a say on their own remit, meaning they could look into claims beyond the two formal complaints that have been made and into perhaps some of the extra complaints that are being made now, one of which I'll just, because I cut it out of the paper earlier, I'll just share some details of it with you. Or will I? I always do this, don't I? On the rare occasions where I remember to cut something out of the paper, I somehow managed to lose it on the way to the studio. But anyway, he's been accused of behaviour so appalling that one of his colleagues had to apologise to other people present at the meeting for Dominic Raab's behaviour. So this story's not going away. And although it is still smoke, there's more and more smoke appearing just as Number 10 prepares to appoint someone to investigate whether there was in fact fire. If you've been listening for the last 20 minutes, that was a superb back reference to Arthur's call, which ended unexpectedly when a fire alarm went off in his place of work. Can we just check he's okay? We have checked he's okay. Thank you. Back to kind of Hislop versus Neville, which is a little bit simplistic when it comes to the complex issues that we're discussing. But Ian Hislop on Have I Got News For You gave Gary Neville quite a public telling off for his decision to travel to Qatar and commentate on games in the World Cup. And the more that the dust has settled and the more that Gary Neville has himself now responded at length and in detail to the accusation that he should not have gone, the more I wonder whether actually Neville was right and Hislop was wrong. For example, if we weren't supposed to go to Qatar, then we certainly shouldn't have gone to Russia for the last World Cup, and we should have swerved the Winter Olympics in China as well. So you can, of course, argue consistently we shouldn't do any of these things, we shouldn't go to any of these things. But if Brexit has taught us anything, it's taught us that we're not quite the players that we thought we were on the world stage. And You can't help wondering whether, even in football, if we were to announce that we weren't going somewhere, the response of the rest of the world would be, oh, they'd probably just think we hadn't qualified. Sorry, Scotland. Terry's in Liverpool. Terry, what would you like to say?
Well, I think with regard to Neville's comment, I think what he said was quite opposite, really. You know, the hypocrisy, the sheer hypocrisy of what we've been saying. The fact that the spotlight has been on Qatar since it won the bid, it has been nothing but for the good. You know, it's been great that the issues have been highlighted, and that they've been dealt with and thrashed around. I'm a bit disappointed with the sloppiness of some reporting of those issues. For example, the constant references, and David Lammy said at the weekend, you know, you talk about 6,500 people got killed building the stadiums. Well, they never, they built the infrastructure. If Qatar didn't have the World Cup, the infrastructure would still have been built and people would still have died. It's not right that people have died. Obviously, it's wrong.
I don't know. I mean, I'm always uncomfortable when callers criticise colleagues who aren't here and for saying things I didn't witness. But the Labour laws have been tightened since the World Cup was announced 12 years ago, and I think we can state with some confidence that there have been unconscionable amounts of death in the workplace in that country compared to what we might loosely describe as Western values, can't we?
Yeah, we can.
Right.
But what I'm saying, I think it's a bit sloppy to refer to it as people dying building stadiums. Because
but
7 stadiums, it'd be 3 a day or something. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It just didn't happen like that.
All right.
People died constructing the infrastructure of a country.
Here's the thing. I hear you. I understand your point, and it's powerful. Here's the problem, right? And I've done this today, but I've done it inevitably because of the nature of the conversation that we're having. So, just because other people have appalling human rights abuses, other countries have appalling human rights abuses, then we should shut up about Qatar. No one's quite saying that, but where is the line of consistency here?
Well, we shouldn't shut up about Qatar. We shouldn't shut up about human rights abuses. We should scream it from the rooftops. But we need to be balanced and we need to be, fair about the whole thing.
And we need to be there? I mean, is it silly to say don't go?
No, it is silly to say don't go. Yeah. But it's not silly. If you don't want to go, don't go. But the point...
But to make it into a point of principle, the way that Ian Hislop distilled it down to Gary Neville's personal decision to join in was pretty unfair in retrospect.
Well, I think it was. I think it was awful. But that's not the point.
For a Scouser to say that about Gary Neville counts double, I think, doesn't it, Terry?
I think he's brilliant, but for all the right reasons.
Yeah.
But no, the thing I would say, what people need to realise is Qatar's made amazing progress over the last two decades. Amazing, to the extent that, for example, it was blockaded by Saudi and the Emirates, and Kuwait, and Egypt, principally because of its progressiveness and its democracy.
It's all relative, though, isn't it? Because, I mean, on the gay legislation, they're not progressive at all. But that's what I mean by relative. Compared to what they liked before, they got better. Compared to some of their neighbours, they got... What's that noise now? What's going on in Liverpool?
It's okay. It's just that's gone. I agree with you. I agree.
But let's all be a bit more open about it, or a little bit more. I don't know.
If you live in Qatar, if you lived in Qatar, you'd see quite an open, progressive society, which is developing, but it's developing at a rate which is behind the development of other nations, nonetheless, very, very...
And so to talk about it as if it's actually going backwards is both unfair and unhelpful. And I think that, although I laughed at that tweet that came in earlier, suggesting that we should have boycotted the World Cup in England in 1966 because homosexuality was still illegal then, actually it does have a relevance to it. In a way that I presume was intended, actually, and I missed at the moment. Thank you, Terry, for that. I'm moving on only because Theo Usherwood is here, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the front page of the Daily Mail today, Theo, because I'm imagining that I am a member of the Gammon and Pineapple Party, and I am reading this, and I think, for example, that all politicians should be like Nigel Farage. And I'm reading this front page story. As cost of living bites and taxes rise, outrage as it's revealed you pay, that's me, that is, and you, and you, and you, and you who, pay for MPs' Christmas parties.
So this story is based based on advice from IPSA, which is the independent watchdog which monitors or processes MPs' expenses and sets rules about MPs' expenses. And of course, it was set up in 2009 after the expenses scandal. And they've issued guidance to MPs to say that they can claim taxpayer-funded expenses, receipts for their Christmas parties as long as they're within reason.
Have they asked for this?
No.
Have they demanded this?
No.
Have they expressed any desire for this?
And there was a meeting 2 weeks ago between MPs and IPSA made no mention that they were going to provide this guidance, which would allow MPs to claim for
It's not an unreasonable move, but in the climate of political toing and froing, it's going to paint enormous targets on politicians' backs if irresponsible journalists portray it as something that politicians are responsible for.
Precisely. And of course, one of those MPs who's very concerned about it is Chris Bryant, the Labour MP for Rhondda, who is also the chair of the Standards Committee.
No MP has asked for this to be allowed. No MP, I'm sure, will claim it. It's preposterous. In the middle of a cost of living crisis, the last thing people want to hear is that MPs are suddenly able to claim for their Christmas works due on taxpayers' expenses. And as I say, not a single MP has asked for it. It wasn't mentioned when we had a recent meeting with IPSA. It's an independent body that sets all these rules, but I think it's inappropriate, it's irresponsible, and I hope IPSA will change its guidance pretty quickly.
I've been on the phone to IPSA before I came down to speak to you, James, and a spokesman has provided me with a statement saying they're aware of concerns regarding the rules for MPs' festive and celebratory claims. Our rules have not changed. They're insisting MPs employ on average 5 members of staff in their local constituencies to deal with casework from members of the public. These cases are often distressing for the constituents and staff member alike, and working in that environment day in, day out is very challenging. As employers, it's entirely appropriate, this is IPSA's line, that MPs should, if they see fit, reward their staff with a modest gathering at Christmas. We are clear that alcohol is not included.
So they're saying it's not new?
They're saying it's not new, that they were asked to clarify.
But the Daily Mail say for the first time?
They're insisting it's not new, that they were asked to clarify the rules. They have clarified the rules, and as a result of clarifying the rules...
You take your team out for a Christmas lunch, you can't put the booze on the expenses, but you can put the food?
Yes.
Within reason.
As long as it's within reason.
I don't even know how bad that is, actually, talking about the targets on the back. Am I allowed to claim expenses when I take this lot out for Christmas? If I'm not going to, don't get your hopes up. But if I did, can I put it on expenses?
We're going to find the nicest restaurant.
God, it was lockdown, wasn't it? Unfortunately. I hope there's another one. Save me a few.
Never got rearranged.
That wasn't my fault. That wasn't my job. I tasked someone with the job of rearranging the Christmas lunch, and they chose not to. I think they felt it was below their pay grade. Also, we got a vegan. It's quite hard to find a good vegan place to go. Maybe I'll just bring in some cakes. That'd be nice. Can I claim cakes on it?
Do a buffet.
I might do a buffet. So, I mean, it's an appalling piece of so-called journalism once again from the Super Sawway Daily Mail. You can't say that. You might get a job there one day.
No. But the point is that Chris Bryant...
I had a job there once.
And MPs made to me is that actually in this current climate where you have inflation in double digits and people are really struggling, and MPs are very aware when they go back to their constituents and they see their voters who've elected them to Parliament, that actually they know that this would be unacceptable to claim for a party. And of course, the danger is that, and this was put to me by one MP, that somehow people might think that MPs are again freeloading and claiming their parties on expenses, and they will be subject to abuse.
An office festive event. That would count as hospitality. As with all claims, value for money should be considered, and all claims will be published in the usual manner. No claims are allowed for alcohol. Mm-hmm. Front page of the Daily Mail. You pay for MPs' Christmas parties! As we've said a few times on this programme, it's a lot easier to sell tickets for the ghost train than the Speak Your Weight machine. And today, the role of the Speak Your Weight machine has been played by Theo Usherwood. Thank you, Theo. 12:45. 12:49 is the time. I'm a bit embarrassed. I've got to do some ego management, right? So earlier today, when we turned our attention to Keir Starmer's speech to the CBI, I spent 16 minutes in conversation with Theo Usherwood, which was lovely. And then I spent about another 7 or 8 on a monologue, would you say? Probably. So not shy of half an hour setting up a phone-in topic. And all I really managed to do was something that Sheila Fogarty has managed to do in approximately 10 seconds. Or so what took me 26 minutes, Sheila did like this.
Coming up at 1 on LBC, Sheila Fogarty.
Keir Starmer wants us to wean ourselves off what he calls our immigration dependency. What do you think he's on about?
If you can't learn from your betters, then you shouldn't turn up at all. But that did rather stop me in my tracks. Sometimes less is more. And that, actually, her question's better than mine. What do you think he's on about? Well, don't phone me now. That's Sheila's question. It took me 25 minutes to get there. Anyway, I digress. We do get some things right, and we do occasionally reach parts that I would suggest other radio programmes can't reach. Here is a little example. Do you remember this call? There's a caller waiting to come on who is so good that we must speak to them before we change course or change plans. So there is no pressure whatsoever on you, Shirley, in Leytonstone. But that is what just happened. The producer just said, can we just talk to Shirley before we move on because she's brilliant. No pressure. What did you want to say?
Just to say, I was born and bred in Bethnal Green, moved to Leytonstone. I'm 73 years of age. And this year, summer, as a thank you present from my daughter, my dream came true. I went to an live opera. It was, I cannot describe this. I can get emotional now.
Well,
to hear an opera singer, an aria, what you've heard on the radio and you've dreamt of seeing, and you hear it, the emotion, it's inside the tears welled up. I could not stop crying. It was unbelievable. It was everything and more than I'd ever wished for. And my near is I'm going to put some money away each week, so once a year I can go to an opera.
That's fantastic.
I was lucky. It was a very thank you present from my daughter. I got very, very good seats. I was so ignorant that I didn't realise. I knew they sang in Italian. I kept saying to her, how will I understand it? I don't speak Italian. You got a little screen in front of you and the words come up. And I didn't realise that. I got but it wasn't elitist. I always thought I was going to feel out of place.
Where does that come from? Where do you think that came from, that sense? Because everyone's got that, this idea that it's not for the likes of...
Because I was born and bred as an East Ender.
Yeah.
In East Ender, this is not for you. You can't succeed in. I'm not going to go into it.
No, of course.
But opera was above me. Opera was only for those who had money and understood it. You don't have to understand it. You feel it. There's a difference.
I'd like to think people talk about this programme like that as well. You don't have to understand it, you just feel it. I'm joking, because we were talking about the decision by the Arts Council to strip the English National Opera of funding or to make them move to the north in order to keep any form of subsidy whatsoever, which has posed, the chief exec told us, an existential threat to the ENO. Stuart Murphy, chief exec, told us he doesn't think the company will survive. And we're just addressing the question of why opera is perceived as... highfalutin or just for the toffs. And the English National Opera were listening to the call that Shirley made, prompting them to do this. The other thing I need to do is get Shirley and Leytonstone back on the programme. Shirley, you touched an awful lot of people with your contribution.
Thank you.
Including the bosses at the English National Opera.
Oh my God.
Who would like to invite you and your husband, I don't want him being left at home this time, to go and see their current production of The Yeoman of the Guard with some of the top seats.
Thank you very much. Oh, God.
So we'll sort all... Don't you start. You'll set me off. So we'll sort all that out, okay? So we'll be in touch with you after the show. And that's thanks to Stuart and everybody else at the English National Opera who've already got in touch with me.
They deserve it. They deserve all the help. This government is breaking England and they want to break our souls as well.
Blimey, I wasn't expecting that at the end, but I was expecting to catch up with Shirley after she had hopefully received the tickets. And did we sort out transport as well? Did we get Shirley to know she had to? It's all good anyway. Shirley is on the line now. So you've been to see what was it like?
It was wonderful, James. I really enjoyed it. It wasn't the same as the other opera, completely different, but in its own way, we enjoyed it. My husband and I really enjoyed it. It was funny. They brought in Brexit, which really made me laugh, and I clapped like mad. So I thought that would make you laugh as well. And it was lovely. The tickets were there. We collected them, went to our seat, sitting there about 10 minutes. Can I go on? I will tell you the whole story.
I want to hear the whole story.
And a lady came up and said, "Are you Shirley?" And yes, is this your husband? Yes, blah, blah, blah. And she said, "We'd like to give you a goodie bag." So she gave us a goodie bag with the ENO opera. And then it was full of stuff and free drinks we were given. And she said, "We'd like to invite you backstage to meet the cast."
I didn't know this.
Which I did not expect at all. I did not expect that. So during the interval, my husband went and got a freebie drink, and he didn't want to go backstage. So I went backstage, and it's like a rabbit warren.
Was
it's
it?
So old. It's lovely. I love history, so it suited me down to the ground. And when I went there, I couldn't believe it. The whole of the chorus was there, some of the orchestra, and they presented me with a bouquet of flowers.
No.
Yeah, and they clapped and gave me free cheers.
Oh.
And I then had to I gave a little speech, and they thanked me for, and I haven't done anything.
You have. You drew attention to the fact that the opera can be for everybody when it's done right, and no one expressed that better than you see.
And it is for everybody. I mean, what the ENO do, seats for people under 25 do not pay.
That's right.
This is a way to get people in to listen live music. There is nothing better. The orchestra was wonderful. The singers were wonderful, and they brought it up to date. They made it in and it was very, very funny. It's like a farce.
Well, it's Gilbert and Sullivan, isn't it? So it's more of a romp than the other opera you saw with the arias and the tears pouring down your face.
It's live singers. Wherever they're singing, it doesn't matter. And go to your local church as well. I went to my local church the other week, and we saw listened to Vivaldi there.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. Just people go and listen to live music.
They should sign you up, the Arts Council. I mean, not only would you give them a bit of a talking to about what they're doing to the ENO, but you could help them with getting their message across to other corners of the country. I just need to know how much your husband enjoyed it, because you had to leave him at home last time.
He really enjoyed it.
Did he?
And I said to him, "Do you want to?" And he didn't want to speak. But
no, of
he's
course.
Thoroughly, and he's as grateful as I am that it was a lovely, lovely afternoon.
Oh, I'm so glad they looked up. I didn't know you were going to get all that, you know.
They couldn't make... It was lovely going by and speaking to the cast, so the singers there, the chorus.
Oh.
And one more thing.
Yeah.
The orchestra gave me their drumsticks done in a red velvet bow with my name and the date, and with love, or with kisses. It was lovely.
Oh.
It was. I've actually got tears.
I'm not surprised that they gave you the right red carpet
really
treatment, didn't they? That's absolutely lovely.
I felt special.
Well, you are special, Shirley.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, you are.
I'm just an ordinary person who...
Well, you're special to me.
I'm just an ordinary person who loves music. I love music. I've always got music on. Except for you, James. I always listen to you.
Yeah, you just remembered that at the end there, didn't you? As soon as you say goodbye, you're going to go and put Classic FM on. I know you, Shirley, in Leytonstone.
I've listened to you about music this morning.
I'm so glad we could help with that. A tiny little...
It was lovely. Thank you very much.
You take care.
It's a memory, as Susan we can think and talk about in the future.
Can't say fairer than that. And you. That's perfect. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that came off. I feel like Hannibal Smith at the end of the A-Team saying, I love it. I love it when a plan comes together. That is it from me for today. Remember that if you want to catch up with this show or any other shows or all of the brilliant Global podcasts, you can do so by downloading the app from Global Player. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4. And Sheila Fogarty, the queen of the pithy trail, is with you now.
Tell you what, if any member of my family is listening, hearing me being praised for brevity, they won't quite, they'll think you've got the wrong woman, I think. Thanks very much, James. That was very complimentary and kind of you. Thank you. 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 Complimentary